Chapter 967. Those thorns actually pierced Arthur's tough finger skin, and all 10 fingers were bleeding. The blood of the ancestors' bloodline flowed into the rose petals. The flowers looked even more enchanting red, as if they were alive. His expression was calm, without a trace of pain, but his movements were getting slower and slower. It was as if there was some force stopping his movements. Wei Wei Bai grabbed his arm. "What are you doing? Your fingers are injured." He heard her worry. Arthur smiled and said gently, "I picked roses to weave a magic corolla for your wedding. The rose corolla from the ancestor's tombstone has an absolute binding power." Wei Wei Bai didn't understand. What power? Looking at the innocent girl, Arthur didn't hide anything. He began to weave the rose corolla with his hands full of blood. "It's the binding power of marriage." The corolla took shape. The gorgeous corolla with the smell of blood, the flowers were thick and heavy, gorgeous and heavy. Arthur took a few steps back, his eyes serious. He held the corolla. "Wei Wei, this is a corolla made by my blood condensed with the ancestors' magic. Once you wear it, you acknowledge our marriage." Wei Wei Bai was a little hesitant. She stared at the corolla in Arthur's hand, not moving. Arthur seemed to know what she was hesitating about. "I won't turn you into a vampire immediately. Even if you become my wife, I will still respect you." No matter what he secretly planned, what he wanted was still her willing companionship, and the heart that loved him. Wei Wei Bai seemed a little helpless. She reached out and held Arthur's bloody fingers. She lowered her head and said gently, "Does getting married hurt so much? Why don't the two of us go to the store and buy a pair of rings? It's cheap and fast." Then she lowered her head, a gentle smile on her lips. "Put it on for me." Arthur's eyes lit up. "These flowers are the flowers of thorns. Once I put it on your head, your heart will be wrapped around me. You will never be able to like anyone in the future." As long as she was willing to wear it. These flowers would become terrifying shackles that would completely lock up her emotions. Apart from him, she could not be moved by anyone else. This was what he had always dreamed of. He was afraid that she wouldn't agree. Wei Wei Bai suddenly bent down and kissed the blood on his fingertips. Then she looked up with a smile on her face. "Do you think I can like anyone else other than you?" These words completely soothed his insecurity. Arthur solemnly placed the corolla in her hair. The beautiful flowers made her face even more charming. Arthur looked at her deeply and felt that the passion in his body was about to burst out. He suddenly straightened his back and knelt down on one knee. His hands tightly interlaced with hers, and his expression became serious. His voice resounded clearly in the cold and silent eternal graveyard. "With blood as a bond and time as a shackle, I will give you the eternal love of the blood clan. Wei Wei, please accept me as your husband." This request was overbearing and could not be refused. Wei Wei Bai's heart moved. She stared at his eyes full of affection. She saw her own shadow in his eyes. She seemed to be bewitched. She also bent down and her lips were almost touching his. Then she softly said, "Okay, I accept." Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 95. Arthur suddenly pulled her into his arms and then lowered his head to kiss her. In the white graveyard, the moonlight of the eternal moon elongated their intertwined shadows. It seemed to be lingering and gentle. // Chapter 968. The system took out a handkerchief to wipe its tears. "I'm so touched. Congratulations to the two of you for finally getting married." Wei Wei Bai affectionately turned to the system, her face instantly paralyzed. "Huh? The system, I've never seen such a compatible non-human couple." "Wei Wei Bai, do you have money? Convert it to life points and transfer it to me, thank you." The system. "You're talking to me about life points at such a romantic moment." Wei Wei Bai, you don't have life points and you're talking to me about romance, trash. Arthur touched by Wei Wei's face. She opened her eyes and saw his eyes full of gentleness. Did you have a nightmare? Wei Wei Bai was silent, her hands hugging his cold body, gently shaking her head. In the few days since they came back from the cemetery, Arthur had been accompanying her to sleep. In the past, when she was disobedient, their nights were filled with all kinds of dirty details. Now that their relationship was stable, he became a gentle gentleman, hugging her to sleep. Arthur, on the other hand, did not think so much. To him, he could stare at Wei Wei Bai the whole night without sleep, and he was satisfied. Wei Wei Bai looked at the green bar above her head. It was only 70. But the favorability was 95. The end of self-destruction seemed to be waiting for her in the near future. Arthur's plan was not feasible at all, she only had less than a month left. She did not have 100 years to waste with him. And if she became a vampire, it would take a lot of effort to kill herself. After all, compared to humans, vampires were. Humans died more easily. Many thoughts ran through her mind. She closed her eyes again, whispering softly, "With you here, I'm not afraid of any nightmares." Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 96. Wei Wei Bai, my mouth is too cheap, I want to slap myself. Can't hold back, self-destruction crematorium. Arthur's fingers gently stroked her hair, he supported his head with one hand, and hugged her waist with the other. Completely encircling her in his arms. Sleep, I'll watch over you. The sunlight outside the window was slightly bright. To Arthur, the daytime had become a lovely time. Because Wei Wei Bai was in his arms, she could wake up at any time. This feeling of his lover waking up beside him, it was strange but blissful. Liz suddenly, she respectfully called out softly outside, "Your Highness." Arthur silently led Wei Wei Bai in his arms, and put a big pillow next to her to let her sleep better. Then he went out. Liz bowed, "Prince Moore is here." Arthur nodded. "Ask him to come to the hall. I have something for him to do. Moore must be here for the Holy Blood Conference." The day of the meeting was just around the corner. Moore had supported him for so many years and had placed almost all his chips on him. It was natural for him to be anxious now. Moore was sitting on the sofa, drinking her morning tea. The cup was filled with blood. He saw Arthur. "You're only free during the day. At night. B." It was almost impossible to get Arthur to come out at night. He had no choice but to not sleep and come during the day. Arthur asked Liz to bring him a cup of substitute blood, and then he said, "The Holy Blood Conference is about to begin, how are the votes now?" Moore glanced at the thing in his cup and couldn't help but frown. "The votes are still stable. Don't you have a little cutie, why are you still drinking this?" He hated Wei Wei Bai, but the smell of blood was irreplaceable. At the banquet last time, the smell on her body made many vampires above the Duke level want to steal her. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record your reading record. Chapter 969. If it wasn't for Arthur's scent and mark on her body, she would have been eaten by the vampires. Arthur was expressionless. "I won't treat my wife as food." Only then did Moore notice the scent on his body. It was the strong scent of roses. He was shocked. "You went to the cemetery with her for a ceremony?" Arthur couldn't help but reveal a gentle smile. Moore's head hurt as he drank a few more mouthfuls of blood. "Hurry up and give her the embrace. What's the big deal about a prince marrying a human?" Wei Wei Bai could become a sub-vampire through the embrace. She was naturally inferior to vampires, but if the person she embraced was Arthur, then Wei Wei Bai would also inherit the bloodline of the ancestor. This kind of special status was not bad. Arthur said casually, "When I become the leader, I'll give her a gift and then discuss the embrace with her." Now that they were in love, he couldn't bear to force her. And he was confident that whether it was for him or for the 100-year plan, she would agree to the embrace. Moore looked up, and the gentleness in his eyes was replaced by calmness. "You've finally made up your mind." His biggest problem was not whether Arthur could become the leader. It was whether he wanted to. Arthur had no interest at all in the past. So what if he had the oldest bloodline and the most respected status? If he didn't want to be the leader, they couldn't force him. For Wei Bai, he finally wanted this position. He suddenly felt that Wei Bai was so cute. Arthur looked at the sunlight outside the door, and a cold light appeared in his eyes. There are indeed many things easier to do in that position. What about the rebel army? Moore couldn't help but sigh at the mention of the rebel army. Those rebel army were all let go by you. If you didn't save so many vampires, they would probably think that you made peace with the rebel army. Arthur nodded. Yes, we're going to start the peace talks. Moore was speechless. Arthur added, not now. I'll wait until they've researched a blood food that can replace humans. Then I'll start to discuss this with them. Moore was speechless. She suddenly couldn't take it anymore. It was very likely that the future leader of the blood race had suddenly said that he wanted to negotiate with food. It felt like the sun had risen. Arthur sighed. 100 years or so should be enough time for humans and vampires to coexist peacefully. Wei should be satisfied. Moore felt dizzy. For a woman, you want us to eat food that can replace blood. And you want humans to be on the same level as us. He must have misheard. It was too frightening. What was wrong with this world? Arthur suddenly stood up. He could not be bothered with Moore anymore. He turned to Liz and ordered. Miss is awake. Prepare the toiletries and breakfast. Tell the kitchen not to prepare food with a strong smell of blood. Prepare more food that is easy to digest. Liz immediately bowed respectfully and went to prepare. Moore stared at Arthur, dumbfounded. Was he still a prince? She must be a human nanny. Arthur glanced at him indifferently. His cold eyes made Moore shiver. It's time for you to scram. I'll be there on time for the meeting the day after tomorrow. Don't worry about the rebel army for now. Let them research the blood food in peace. If necessary, provide them with some funds. Moore felt like the whole world was a fantasy. He stared blankly at the blood in his cup. Suddenly, he drank it all, leaving not a single drop behind. He might have to eat food that can replace blood in the future. He would not be able to drink such fresh blood. Now, he did not think that Wei Bai was cute at all. Chapter 970. That was a devil. She had lured away the most respected prince of the blood race, and then the entire blood race would be on equal footing with humans. Could prey be on equal footing with predators? What a joke, the predators had become the nannies of humans, so what if they were on equal footing? It would be good enough if the blood race did not become the servants of all humans. Moore thought of that sunny future. He felt uncomfortable all over. He hurriedly took his leave, not wanting to see how Arthur surrendered at Weiwei's feet. Arthur was his idol, and he did not want to see his idol's ego crumble. The day of the meeting came quickly. The moon had just hung in the east when the castle was bustling. Arthur put on his complicated and gorgeous aristocratic clothes, and the carriage was waiting outside. He reached out his fingers and buttoned his cufflinks with one hand. His every move was full of heavy and ancient elegance. This was the aristocratic temperament created by time. Wei Bai looked at him, gently tiptoed, and reached out to adjust his collar. Arthur smiled at her and could not help but hold her hand. Wei Bai lowered her head a little embarrassedly. Go early and come back early. Arthur bent down and kissed her forehead, Well, the meeting will continue until midnight to choose the leader of the blood race. If I am chosen, the leader's bloodbath ceremony will be held. I may not come back until tomorrow afternoon. His tone was calm, as if the Sacred Blood Conference was just an ordinary gathering. Wei Wei Bai did not dare to say anything flirtatious, so she just smiled. Okay, I wish you success. Arthur heard the bell outside and knew that the meeting was about to begin. He let go of her fingers, then took a few steps back, looked at her a few more times, then suddenly turned around and walked out. Wei Wei Bai watched Arthur leave. Then she began to think about how to accelerate the progress of the green bar value. The system had nothing to do, so it gave her an idea. I heard that this bloodbath ritual thing will trap the recipient in a magic circle, making it impossible for them to leave. Why don't you take the opportunity to steal Arthur's badge, make a peace agreement, stamp it, and send it to Los Cannon Fodder, and the green bar will be full. Wei Wei Bai shook her head calmly. I don't think it's that easy. The side quests of the main system were getting more and more ridiculous. She had a feeling that the main system wanted to kill her. And it was a very obvious and violent way, which made her feel that her table manners were too unsightly. Moreover, these side quests were almost always in opposition to the raid objective. Did the main system want her and her target to kill each other? She clearly wanted to capture Love, but she wanted her to risk her life to kill the target. She, who was deprived of feelings, couldn't understand how painful it was to capture a target with a favorability of 100. But it was definitely not a good feeling. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but mutter, does the main system have a grudge against all the targets? Am I a tool for revenge? Just as these words were spoken, the system blurted out, how could there be a grudge? It loves the male lead to death. Back then, to make the male lead, this sentence was cut off halfway. The system was choked. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before nodding lightly. She dragged out her words. Oh, I love the male lead to death. So much. So much so that it wanted her to torture him. Was the main system an S&M lover? The system silently squatted behind the trash can. I don't know anything. Don't ask me. If you ask me, I'll self-destruct. Wei Wei Bai, what exactly was this trash hiding from her? Quick. Chapter 971. Bai Weiwei felt like she was caught up in a shocking conspiracy. She wouldn't be caught up in the end, right? Suddenly, she started to doubt the system. The system seemed to know what she was thinking and immediately cried, "You heartless person. I didn't dare to eat too much just to do so much. I know you're poor, and I can't bear to take the system's reward. I protected you, gave you rewards, and carried your soul through the plains every day. Do you know how fat you are? You broke my little arm, and you dare to doubt me. You dead ghost, I want to divorce you." Wei Wei Bai caught the main point, system's reward. The system said, our system has labor laws, and there's a minimum wage. You have to give me half of your life points in every plane, and I didn't give you any. The main thing was that 30 days was too little. If it really took it, the host would probably die. Wei Wei Bai couldn't bear it. Then, can I fire you and change to a more powerful system? I can give you a salary. Now that she had life points, she could give out 15 days' worth of salary. The system felt like its little heart was broken. It vomited blood. You scumbag master, how dare you abandon me in the middle of the night and turn into a ghost to hang in front of the bed, licking your face every day. Wei Wei Bai thought of that scene and felt disgusted. Today was another day of loving between the host and the system. Wei Wei Bai still couldn't get any conspiracy out of it. She was about to rearrange her doubts when suddenly there was a strong wind outside the window. She looked up and saw a black wing breaking through the window. A man's face that she had never seen before suddenly appeared in front of her. He fiercely bared his teeth. "You're the one who put my sister into a deep sleep forever." Wei Wei Bai suddenly remembered. Wasn't he Sang Er's brother, one of the three princes? What was his name again? Cannon fodder number 2. Before she could retreat and call for help, the other party had already grabbed her and flew out of the castle. He broke through all the magic defenses and successfully kidnapped her. Arthur definitely doesn't know that I will support him. He has already successfully obtained all the votes to become the leader. Cannon fodder number 2 sneered. He was a prince, and he suppressed the servants and guards in Arthur's castle. The vampires guarding Wei Wei Bai wouldn't be able to react in time and abduct Wei Wei Bai. He flew to a dilapidated warehouse. Then, he pushed Wei Wei Bai into a huge bloody magic array. Wei Wei Bai stood up, only to find that a few blood-red chains had appeared in the array, instantly locking her hands and feet, imprisoning her in the center of the array. The second cannon fodder was called Sang Axian. Sad. What kind of stupid name is this? Can't you be any more lazy with your naming? Sangxin grinned at Wei Wei Bai. Arthur is in the middle of the bloodbath ceremony. He can't come out. It's useless even if you scream yourself hoarse until tomorrow afternoon. After he finished speaking, he clapped his hands. A crystal coffin was pushed out. Sang Axian lay quietly in the coffin. Sang Axian said coldly, "I heard that you and Arthur have become husband and wife. You are bound by the ancestral magic and have Arthur's mark. I will deprive you of everything to save my sister." Wei Wei Bai sat in the middle of the array, her expression incomparably cold. She really couldn't be bothered to make an expression towards passers-by other than her target. She was afraid that she would inexplicably seduce a random cannon fodder. It was very tiring to deal with this. As a result, when she saw the villain now, her expression was also paralyzed. Chapter 972. Sang Axian thought that his words could scare Wei Wei Bai. However, her eyes were terrifyingly calm, as if she was looking at a clown. Was he not fierce and scary enough? Sang Axian thought that she didn't realize how cruel she was, so she immediately added, "This formation will continuously give my sister your blood, your soul, and your memories, including the mark that Arthur gave you, and the power of the rose crown." Wei Wei Bai finally looked up at him. Sang Axian sneered, thinking that she was afraid. "Do you know what this means? Everything you have, including Arthur's love for you, will become my sister's. I support Arthur's ascension because he must marry my sister. With everything you have, he will definitely fall in love with my sister." Wei Wei Bai suddenly could not help but laugh. She really could not hold it in. It was fine that Arthur was Chinibu, but why was his opponent even more Chinibu than him? Sang Axian's eyes darkened. "What are you laughing at?" Wei Wei Bai held her chin with both hands, her cat-like eyes suddenly filled with tenderness and warmth. It was like the falling stars, but also like the flowing river of light. Her smile was unbelievably beautiful, and it came from the depths of her soul. Even Sang Axian, who was used to seeing beautiful girls, was stunned. He was also stunned. He had never seen such a lively smile before. Then he heard the girl say word by word with a smile, "What a big face. I worked so hard to make that bastard Arthur bend his knees to serve me." Sang Axian. Wasn't she a delicate little white flower? Why was she suddenly so strange? Wei Wei Bai looked up casually, her eyes were cold and piercing. "I'm such a unique and perfect girl. My smile can win the Guinness Book of World Records for the most beautiful smile. Who do you think can replace me?" The system said, "Hey, that's enough. Please stop boasting and let your bottom line hit a new low." Wei Wei Bai listened to the system's advice and decided to lower her bottom line. She slowly stood up, crossed her arms, and looked at Sang Aksayan in the crystal coffin. Your face is 3 parts, your body is 2.5 parts, your temperament is low. Even if you were to stick a fragment of my beautiful soul on your face, you would still be able to find me. She can't even save that shriveled figure of hers, that mung bean like myopia, and that rotten conscience of hers. Sang Aksayan glanced at her sister in confusion. Was his sister that bad? Wei Wei Bai's aura was cold and her words were sharp. Don't talk about extracting my soul, blood, and memories. Even if you clone an exact copy of me, I'm sorry, but my man still won't look at her. San Sin was about to say something. Wei Wei Bai raised her hand. There's no need to refute. This is the truth. I am me, the one and only firework. The system held its head in silence. It suddenly felt that it wasn't so bad to have a new host. It did not want to admit that it had followed such a lowly host. It had such a tough life. Wei Wei Bai looked coldly at Sang Aksayan, the man she had risked her life to win over. This damned cannon fodder wanted to steal her fruit with just one formation. What did it mean to steal Arthur's love? It meant that her HP was gone. What did it mean that her HP was gone? It meant that she had to kill someone. She felt the pinch to give the system some HP. Other than the system, anyone who dared to steal her HP was her enemy. Sang Aksayan was stunned by the scolding and suddenly realized that something was wrong. Why was he listening to her boasting? He was here to save his sister. Sang Aksayan immediately activated the formation and said angrily, I don't care if you're a firework or a firecracker. I have to wake my sister up today. Far away at the location of the Sacred Blood Conference, Arthur, who was holding the blood bath ceremony, suddenly opened his eyes. Silver strands of hair cascaded down his naked body. The huge blood pool formation slowly rotated. The blood-red light was imprinted on his delicate snow-white face, giving him a strange charm. Suddenly, he felt a pain in his chest, and the pattern of a rose faintly appeared. Did something happen to Wei Wei? The full articles the downloads the ST. Chapter 973. The huge plundering array began to activate. The system immediately activated the life guarantee. This array threatens your life and even intends to deprive your soul. This is not allowed in the system world. The life guarantee can ensure that you will be fine for 10 minutes. Because it was a magic deprivation from a special plane. The effect of the life guarantee suddenly changed from 1 day to 10 minutes. It was rare for the system to be so serious. Vivian, don't underestimate this array. The spirit array will damage your soul. Your soul doesn't have any protective measures in this plane, so as long as it's an attack from the soul magic, you may be affected. Just like the immortal cultivation plane last time. Her soul was almost locked in that plane by the male lead. Wei Wei Bai could feel that she was very uncomfortable in this array. She muttered to herself in a low voice, can't the system world protect the host's soul? Isn't this the most basic thing? If she was the system, she would let her host carry out the mission. The first thing she would protect was the host's soul. This was because the flesh and skin could change. But the soul was gone. The host was finished. Although she didn't know what benefits the system would gain from collecting the target's love and forcing her to leave after 100 favorability points. But if the host failed halfway and the soul disappeared, it would definitely be a loss. She, a businessman, knew this principle. There was no reason why the system didn't know. The system was silent. It didn't dare to say anything. Wei Wei Bai was just complaining. After all, her life was earned by herself. Complaining was never her style. She frowned at the array. The blood-colored array symbols began to emit a bloody light. It was terrifying to look at. Sang Axian stood outside the array and looked at her coldly. Don't think that Arthur can come and save you. He is now under the most ancient and powerful binding baptism array of the vampires. It is also the leader's final test. The malicious smile on his lips was obvious. He can only come out of the array in the afternoon. No vampire can break free from the binding of that blood array, so you will obediently become my sister's nourishment. Wei Wei Bai watched as the terrifying blood patterns began to spread to her feet. But because of the life support, it couldn't enter her body. She counted her HP and planned to ask the system to give her a life-saving item. He was usually stingy, but when it came to life-saving situations, he had to be willing to part with it. Trash, do you have anything in your supermarket that can help me get rid of this thing? The system flipped through it. There is, but it's too expensive. Why don't I buy you a retarded halo, the one you gave your senior brother in the immortal hero dimension? Once the villain's IQ was lowered, her chances of survival were much higher. Wei Wei Bai is thinking hard. Xianxia Plain. It was too long ago, and because of the system, her memory was even more blurred. He couldn't remember the cannon fodder from that plane at all. Retarded halo definitely didn't sound reliable. She suddenly felt a sharp pain coming from her ankle. The red blood traces turned into sharp vines that wrapped around her feet. It was as if her soul was about to be ripped out of her body. Her eyes trembled. Just as she was about to agree with the system's suggestion, her pupils suddenly shrank as if she had sensed something. At the same time, the system reminded her, the male lead is here. A terrible tearing sound came from the roof of the warehouse. The sound of the metal house being cut by some terrible sharp weapon made people's backs go numb and their hearts tremble. / the save button below to record this reading record. Chapter 974. Wei Wei Bai immediately put away the coldness on her face and sat on the ground. Her face was pale, showing a painful expression, and her body was curled up pitifully. The system was impressed by the host's dedication to maintaining the character for thousands of years. Just now, she was still arguing with the sky and the earth. When the male lead came, she could change her face in 0.01 seconds. The roof was suddenly cut open, and sunlight poured in from the crack. A huge bat fell from the roof. On the back of the bat, a head of long silver hair fluttered in the wind. The sunlight fell on the man's exquisite and cold face, illuminating the boiling killing intent in his red eyes. He saw Wei Wei Bai curled up in the center of the array. The overbearing blood pattern of the plunder array wrapped around her slender and fragile ankles, and her blood was beginning to be plundered by the array. The air was filled with the smell of blood coming from her body. It was an unbelievably sweet smell. But it made Arthur completely explode. He couldn't bear to drink the blood, couldn't bear to touch the person. She was actually treated like this. Arthur, who had never lost his composure in the face of thousands of soldiers and horses, was like a terrifying killing god at this moment. His expression was even sinister. He raised his hand, and the cold and terrifying blood blade fell from the sky. The plunder array began to shake violently. The vines that wanted to plunder Wei Wei Bai were ruthlessly cut up and smashed by the blood blade. Wei Wei Bai felt an earthquake, and the vines on her feet disappeared. Just as she looked up, a half-naked man was already standing in front of her with his back to her. His silvery hair fell over his broad shoulders, over his handsome shoulder blades, to just below his powerful waist. In the faint strands of hair, she could even see his slender legs wearing trousers. His voice came from above her head. It seems that I slept for too long, you forgot how unkind I am to this world. No matter, I will let you remember today. With that, Arthur raised his hand, and a complex and terrifying circular attack array began to form. This power was oppressive and terrifying. As a prince, Sang-Axian suddenly felt that the same rank was useless. Because he was suppressed. It was bloodline suppression. The power that erupted from Arthur's body completely suppressed him to the ground. He could only watch as his sister's coffin began to shatter. Sangxin screamed, "Arthur, you will be judged for slaughtering your own kind." Arthur's face was expressionless. He lowered his blood-red eyes and looked down at him. "Trial. There is only one person who can judge me, and none of you are qualified." With that, he raised his hand and crushed Sang-Er's sleeping body. "Since you like this array so much, I'll give you one." With that said, a complex formation began to form under Sang-Axian's feet. It took Sang-Axian 3 days to construct this array. Arthur only glanced at it for a moment before replicating it instantly. The formation was instantly formed, and its power was even more terrifying. A vampire prince was locked in the center of the plunder formation. In the red light, Sang-Er's flesh began to erode. Vampires had no soul, and all their power came from their bloodline. When the formation completely stripped the bloodline from Sang-Axian's body, he had become a shriveled, empty shell. Arthur looked on indifferently. His body blocked Wei Wei Bai's line of sight. He couldn't suppress his urge to brutally punish others. But he still didn't want her to see anything too terrifying. What was stripped away? Arthur waved his hand and instantly crushed the prince's bloodline. To read the full article at https://www.sashu.com to read the at https://m.sashu.com. Chapter 975. The warehouse was empty. There was only shattered remains on the ground. The cold killing intent surging from Arthur's body began to fade. He slowly turned around, his body naked, his cold face still carrying a cruel killing intent. Wei Wei Bai looked up at him blankly. Arthur looked at her silently for a while, then suddenly clenched his fingers and knelt down on one knee. He was like her most loyal knight, kneeling down to his only princess. The sunlight shone on his eyelashes, casting broken shadows. He said in a hoarse voice, "It's all my fault, I didn't protect you well." He shouldn't have been so careless, thinking that all the vampires could be trusted. When he protected Wei Wei Bai, he was fully prepared. What Wei Wei Bai didn't even know was that he had personally asked Mo Er to protect her. Because of the 3 princes, if he entered the bloodbath ceremony, then only Sang-Axian could pose a threat to Wei Wei Bai. And because of the bloodline suppression, only Mo Er could restrain Sang-Axian. But he didn't expect that Mo Er had planned to let Wei Wei Bai die from the beginning. That was why he let Sang-Axian deal with Wei Wei Bai. This was his negligence. The prince who never apologized when he did something wrong, and would even destroy the evidence. It was the first time he was so scared, so guilty, and so heartbroken. Arthur saw the scar on her ankle, his lips trembled, and pity and guilt appeared in his blood-red eyes. His thin lips opened slightly. "Only you can judge me, Wei Wei." His tone could even be said to be humble. Wei Wei Bai supported herself with both hands and sat up with difficulty. Her ankle had lost feeling, making her movements very slow. She didn't have any expression, and her complexion wasn't very good. Suddenly, she stretched out her hands and hung them around his neck, leaning against him. Her soft hair rubbed against his naked body, and she said softly, "Let's go back." It was a simple sentence, but it softly drilled into his body. He felt the fear and anger that something had happened to her, and it all dissolved. There was only her warm words in his heart. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 97. Arthur lowered his head and pressed her head into his embrace. His lips were close to her ear. "You go back first." I'll be back to normal tomorrow. Before Wei Wei Bai could ask anything, Arthur had already picked her up and placed her on the back of the bat. He looked up at her with a gentle smile. Then he patted the bat on the head. The bat flapped its wings and flew up with Wei Wei Bai on its back. Wei Wei Bai sensed that something was wrong with Arthur. What happened to him? He forcefully broke free from the ancient formation's power and interrupted the leader's baptism. He suffered a severe backlash, his bloodline is now severely injured. What are the consequences? The system's tone was heavy. For the blood breeds, they will die unless they receive a large amount of blood. This was true death. Once a member of the blood race's bloodline was damaged, their body would wither and they would die. Wei Wei Bai frowned as she watched Arthur getting further and further away from her. His expression was still calm and gentle, and no one could see the pain of the backlash. Wei Wei Bai sighed. Do you know? This guy is really asking for a beating. I've been thinking every day that when the favorability is full, I'll slap him a few times to wake him up. The system said, you can do that now. The favorability is almost full. The male lead probably wouldn't fight back now. Wei Wei Bai said, but he was actually quite handsome just now. The system was shocked. The host actually praised someone. There. Chapter 976. No, it was inhuman. Was the world going to turn upside down? Wei Wei Bai muttered to herself, I can only take a gamble. Otherwise, if the target really dies, I'll die too. The most unfair thing about this stupid mission was, most of the time, side quests were attached to the target of the quest. If he died, she would definitely explode on the spot. Don't ask her how she figured it out. The main system was such a jerk. After going through so many worlds, she had a rough idea of its character. It was just that the main system didn't treat her with the friendliness of an employee at all. It probably treated her as a useless tool. It would abandon her at any time. As for her life, there was a high probability that it would be tied to the goal of the mission. The only one who had feelings for her now was the scumbag system that only knew how to eat and not work. Unfortunately, the scumbag system was a poor loser in the system world. It had no money, power, or connections. They were simply the most pitiful and poor system in the system world. So the target could not die. Wei Wei Bai patted the bat's head. Go back. The bat ignored her. Wei Wei Bai, the system felt awkward for her and then ordered, go back. The bat turned around and immediately flew back. When it saw the warehouse, the bat refused to go over, as if it was afraid of something. It stopped outside the warehouse and did not fly. Wei Wei Bai could only struggle to get off the bat and then limp towards the warehouse. Fortunately, the door was unlocked. She pushed open the door. A terrifying chill came over. She shivered. The sunlight above the warehouse fell, but there was no warmth at all. Wei Wei Bai walked in slowly. She tried calling Arthur. No one answered. Wei Wei Bai turned around and was shocked. A black figure was curled up in the corner of the warehouse. She saw that it was Arthur. His eyes were tightly shut, and his face was even paler. It was so pale that it was abnormal, like a lifeless plaster statue. The bloody teeth by his lips were exposed. His body was trembling violently, as if he was enduring something. In the dark corner, only his messy silver hair shone with some light. Wei Wei Bai walked in front of him, frowning, worried that she would touch him. Arthur suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with blood and lost focus. The tip of his nose twitched, and he suddenly smelled something he desperately needed. The smell of blood. And it was the smell of the highest quality blood. His body on the verge of collapse needed food. Arthur's mouth revealed a ferocious smile, and his hand quickly grabbed Wei Wei Bai's wrist. He pulled her into his arms. Then he lowered his head and bit her neck. The blood quickly entered his dry body. Moisten his hungry tongue. Bai Weiwei expected that he might become a predator. But she did not expect him to lose his mind. Then she looked to see the green value increase. Bai Weiwei's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light, knowing that she had guessed correctly. The target and the mission. If she can save Arthur's life, then the progress bar of the mission would start to rise. In other words, the main system believed that Arthur could promote peace between humans and vampires. Wei Wei Bai saw the green value increase to 80. She said to the system, "If my body can't take it, remember to tell me." She did not come here to give up her life. Just as she finished speaking, the teeth biting her neck paused. She heard the sound of violent breathing, which could even be called panic. "Wei Wei." He gritted his teeth and said with a trembling voice. Slash. Chapter 977. Wei Wei Bai looked up and saw Arthur's eyes that had regained their clarity. His eyes were filled with disbelief. She pulled out a weak smile, her voice weak. "Are you feeling better?" Arthur's body began to tremble, his expression a little distorted. His lips were stained with blood, and his face was terrifyingly pale. He could vaguely smell her scent, and he knew that something was wrong. But his body was in desperate need of food. He couldn't control his instincts. When there was more blood in his body and he recovered a little, he used all his strength to break free from his instincts. He saw a scene from a nightmare. He actually treated her as food and ate her. His tone became agitated. "Why did you come back?" He was afraid that she would come back. He was picky about food. If he started to lose his mind, Wei Wei Bai would be his first choice of food. Even if he went out to hunt, he would very likely give up on those humans with bad smells. Instead, he would follow her sweet smell and hunt her. He was afraid that he would become a demon that preyed on his lover. He used a binding array to bind himself. He tied himself to a corner and couldn't walk out. He wanted to rely on his willpower to endure the blood damage. He did so much to prevent himself from treating her as food. Arthur's expression became angry. He gripped her shoulder and repeated the question word by word. "Why did you come back?" Wei Wei Bai saw that he was so agitated and her head started to feel dizzy. She knew that it was the sequela of excessive blood loss, so she didn't take it to heart. As long as his life was not in danger, it was fine. She was about to comfort him. Arthur was already in a hurry to carry her, his eyes trembling with fear. "Hurry, I'll take you to the rebel army. They have a lot of holy water that can save you." Wei Wei Bai, ? Save her. Send her to the hospital for a blood transfusion. Arthur's voice was choked with despair. "I was cursed. There is poison in my teeth. You will die." Once the baptism blood bath backfired, it would carry a terrifying poison that would start to corrode his body. His body was strong and could temporarily resist this corrosion. But Wei Wei Bai was a human. She would be tainted. He was dead for sure. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. "Poison." The system said, "Poisonous." Arthur lowered his head and looked at her pale face. A layer of greenish-gray death chi appeared. "Why did you come back? Could it be that to save me, you would even give up your life?" "Wei Wei Bai, why didn't you tell me earlier that it was poisonous? What the hell was with the setting that vampires were poisonous creatures? If I had known that you were poisonous, who would have dared to come back?" Wei Wei Bai reached out and grabbed his long hair, looking at him anxiously. Arthur had a pained expression on his face. He felt like his body was being torn apart by an intense pain. Even if they managed to break free from the ancient formation, they would suffer unimaginable torture. He had never been in such pain before. The holy water can save you. Even if I have to kill the entire rebel army, I will steal all of their holy water for you. To the rebel army, holy water was the most precious medical resource. He would never give it to an outsider. If he wanted to get all of their medical supplies in a short time, he could only kill. Ding! The male lead has killing intent towards humans. 5% of the green bars have been deducted. Wei Wei Bai's expression became even uglier. Arthur felt her trembling. He hugged her even tighter, afraid that she would lose her breath halfway. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 98. Wei Wei Bai looked at the terrifying favorability and the green bars that had been deducted. If this continued, once the favorability was full, she would self-destruct. Chapter 978. The Anti-Alliance had not been peaceful recently. When Los was released, he came back with a promise to negotiate peace with Arthur. But many people had deep hatred for vampires. They expressed great resentment towards the proposal of peace that was obviously biased towards humans. They all felt that Arthur was just trying to deceive them so that he could catch them all in one fell swoop. Fortunately, Los had a special identity. His father was the founder of the Anti-Alliance, and his mother was a human aristocrat. He had also made countless contributions to the Anti-Alliance. That gave him the power to speak on this proposal. He wanted to negotiate. He had seen enough bloody killings since he was young. He was not willing to let his descendants live under the shadow of slaughter. Another important reason was that he did not want Wei Wei Bai's efforts to go to waste. When he was hung up and tortured, he thought that he would definitely die. But in a daze, he suddenly saw Arthur sitting in front of him. He held his chin, and his eyes were terrifyingly cold. He looked at him with a judgmental gaze. Los thought that he was here to kill him. However, Arthur frowned in confusion. Why does she like to stand on your side so much? She was just born a human. Why does she look down on high-level creatures like vampires? Why does she have to die to join you? Wei Wei Bai. Los opened his mouth and said dryly, she didn't join us. I just used her. Arthur looked up lazily. Oh, you have deep feelings for my woman. Los bit his lip. The unspeakable feelings in his heart made him feel a little guilty. Arthur touched his chin. You have good taste. My baby always has so many people admiring her. It really bothers me. Los was speechless. He did not have the habit of chatting with a vampire. After Arthur finished speaking, he casually gave him a blood blade to worsen his injuries. I'm here today to talk to you about peace. Los spat out a mouthful of blood. Did he come to negotiate just to give him a blood blade and worsen his injuries so that he could wait for death? Arthur did not care whether Los died or not. After he finished explaining his plan, he casually made 2 cuts on Los's face. Although men did not care about their faces, and with the current technology, they could easily restore their looks. But this Arthur was a psychopath. He seemed to dislike him very much. At the same time, he told him that he wanted to make peace. Why was he torturing him? Split essence. Roth thought that this was a new form of torture. In the end, when he was on the verge of death, Arthur waved his hand and said, "Let everyone go. Think about the proposal we made just now. After all, we still have 100 years to slowly discuss it. Remember to go back and tell everyone that I was the one who suggested it. It's best to write my name clearly. Ross?" This was undoubtedly a plan to betray the vampires. Shouldn't normal vampires hide their names? Why would there be vampires who wanted to announce their existence to the world? He must be out of his mind. It was only when Rosie was carried out that he realized that Arthur was being serious. When he turned around, Arthur was sitting in the sun with his back to him, but his back was indescribably lonely and haggard. He heard Arthur scoff at himself. "I'm really crazy. I'm willing to do anything to stop you from crying." Ross knew who the she he was talking about was. Arthur's voice gradually weakened. "We've already made peace. You'll pay attention to me, right? You said that making peace means you love me," although his tone was extremely calm. Ross could hear the bitterness and grievance in his voice. It was only later that he realized that this proposal was requested by way from Arthur. Chapter 979. Loth did not expect that they had such a deep feud with vampires for so long. But it could not compare to the efforts of a young girl. Peace was indeed the best way out for humans. A researcher ran over. "Lord Loth, we don't have enough holy water here. We need to ask for more from the headquarters." Loth frowned. "Why is it not enough?" The researcher sighed. "We are short of raw materials, and we have distributed more holy water to the slums this year." Holy water was developed by the Anti-Alliance medical team. It had a certain effect on attacking vampires. But the more important effect was to cure vampires' poison. Many humans did not know that vampires' poison was not only lust poison. Under some special circumstances, vampires could also secrete other kinds of poison. For example, during the embrace, the poison would be different. And when they were injured, the poison would become highly toxic. What was even more terrifying was that vampires who were cursed and had their blood damaged would have the most terrifying poison. Holy water had a certain effect on alleviating this kind of poison. So they distributed diluted holy water to the slums so that more poor humans could survive. Of course, if they encountered highly toxic poison, the diluted holy water would not be of much use. The Anti-Alliance would store some precious holy water stock. Different from outside, it had a very good detoxification effect. But it was not easy to make, and once there was a shortage of holy water. Many of the injured members would also die. Loth rubbed his forehead and said tiredly, "Because of the peace talks, everyone is very tired. I will sign a transfer contract to the headquarters tomorrow." There had been fewer attacks on vampires recently. There was no increase in injured members. Those who relied on holy water for treatment were only the heavily injured members who were released by Arthur last time. The researcher nodded and was about to leave. Suddenly, a terrifying and sharp warning sound came from the sky. "Vampire attack." Loth turned around in shock. What was going on? Arthur clearly said that during the peace talks, he would suppress the Vampire Empire's actions and not let them attack the Anti-Alliance. The fierce attack, the terrifying power, instantly destroyed all of the Anti-Alliance defenses. A human against a prince-level vampire. There was no chance of winning. Loth picked up his weapon and ran out. The door collapsed, and Roth saw the countless blood blades coming at him. His pupils constricted, and he rolled on the ground to avoid them. Countless specks of light surged into the collapsed dust. A slender figure that looked like a god of slaughter walked in with a terrifying stench of blood. Roth's eyes were bloodshot. He gritted his teeth and roared, "Arthur, you betrayed our agreement." He had been running around for so many days to negotiate peace, but in the end, it was just a joke from Arthur. Arthur arrived in front of Rosie in the blink of an eye. His sharp fingernails dug into Loth's shoulders as he glared at him with his blood-red eyes. "Where is the holy water here?" Only the rebel army had a large amount of holy water. The diluted holy water that was circulating outside was completely useless. Roth then saw the person he was most familiar with lying in the arms of this furious and crazy vampire. Wei Bai. Her face was deathly pale and her eyes were half closed. Her eyes were lifeless and had long lost their lively color. Was he poisoned? Poisoned by the vampiric curse. Roth's teeth started to chatter. How could she be like this? Who attacked her? She was dying. He was too experienced. Many of the members had died from being poisoned by vampires. /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone, https://m/sashu.com. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record your reading record. You can see it the next time you open the bookshelf. Chapter 980. Arthur didn't answer. He dug his nails deeper and asked fiercely, "Don't force me to kill all the humans. Hurry up and take out all the holy water here." What was a negotiation? What were humans? If she were to die, there would be no point in the existence of these playthings that pleased her. Arthur's fingers were cold, but the girl in his arms was even colder. Her body had always been so warm, like a small sun to him. But now, it was so cold that it made him shiver. Laos didn't hesitate and immediately got up. "Follow me." The holy water was stored in a special warehouse. After Arthur knew the location, he didn't even think and blasted all the doors. Laos's expression was ugly. This was simply a violent demolition. The high-concentration holy water is all here. Arthur saw the row of glass bottles. Where's the bathroom? The venom had already entered her internal organs. The high-concentration holy water couldn't be drunk directly. It could only be soaked. Laos was very cooperative. He pointed to his room for Arthur. Arthur took away all the holy water. Then he poured it into the bathtub. He took off Wei Wei Bai's clothes. Halfway through, he reacted and raised his hand fiercely, throwing Laos behind him. The murderous look on Arthur's face was replaced by anxious pain. His hands trembled violently as he took off her clothes. Then he carefully put the petite and fair girl into the holy water. The holy water was quickly dyed black. It wasn't enough, the venom was too powerful. The holy water needed to be replaced constantly. Bai Weiwei's complexion began to become abnormal. Originally, she was deathly pale, but her pale face began to turn red. Gorgeous and dazzling, tender and beautiful to the point of being bewitching. She forced herself to open her eyes and saw that the green bar had decreased again. 65%, this side mission was simply poisonous. She moved her lips and said with difficulty, "Don't hurt others." If Arthur killed a few more humans, no amount of holy water could stop her from self-destructing on the spot. This death was too ugly. She refused. Arthur saw her face and knew that the venom had entered her heart. He revealed a smile that was filled with killing intent. "You better hold on and not die. Otherwise, not only will I hurt others, I will also become the greatest nightmare of mankind in my lifetime." He didn't care about threats. It was fine as long as it was useful. As long as she didn't leave him. Under the man's ferocious expression was a fearful and humble plea. Outside the door, Los heard that something was wrong. "How's Wei Wei?" He had just made an emergency call to the headquarters to get the holy water. However, when the headquarters heard that it was going to be used here, they refused. It was impossible to use so much holy water for a single human. Arthur suddenly appeared outside the door. His eyes were scarlet, and his cold face was filled with murderous intent. "Where is the infirmary?" Los knew what he was going to do. He grabbed Arthur's arm tightly. "I won't let you touch the holy water in the infirmary. It's life-saving." Arthur's face was expressionless. He raised his hand and grabbed his neck, lifting him up. Help. Once she's dead, your lives are worthless. How can a bunch of cheap bugs talk to me about saving your lives? To the prince. The lives of all humans were not worth a single strand of Wei Wei Bai's hair. When Arthur saw Lo's unyielding expression, he was so irritable that he wanted to break his neck. An intense pain suddenly burned through his palm. Arthur let go of his hand. Lo's quickly fell to the ground and retreated. A crystal cross appeared on his neck. Slash. Chapter 981. It wasn't the cross that attacked him. It was the liquid in the cross that attacked the vampires. A crystal dagger of the same style appeared in Los's hand and he put on an attacking posture. I won't let you touch the holy water in the infirmary. They're my brothers. Arthur's palm instantly recovered. He didn't take Los seriously and was about to finish him off. A painful unbroken sound disrupted his rhythm. When Los thought that he was definitely going to die, Arthur had already disappeared and returned to the bathroom. Los collapsed and couldn't help but whisper, "You saved me again, Wei Wei." After saying that, a trace of determination flashed in his eyes. He turned around without hesitation and cleaned up the living room. Then he began to use his own blood to draw an array in the living room. Even if he snatched all the holy water in the infirmary, he couldn't let Wei Wei Bai live. The holy water in the headquarters was too far away. By the time he got it, Wei Wei Bai would be cold. He could only use this method. Arthur, that idiot with a hole in his head, was a vampire himself, but he actually forgot the most important method to save Wei Wei Bai's life. After he finished drawing the array, Los realized that his eyes were full of tears. He knew that he and Wei Wei Bai would never be together. Even he didn't feel that there was anything wrong with his secret love this time. But the result was unexpectedly heavy. Arthur entered the bathroom and found Wei Wei Bai leaning her head against the edge of the bathtub. Her snow-white arms stretched out to support her head. Her long black hair was wet and fell to her side. She opened her pure black eyes and looked at him quietly. The holy water in the bathtub had already turned black. He squatted down and reached out to touch her face gently. His movements were careful and afraid. Wei Wei Bai frowned in pain and softly put her hand on his arm. Don't kill people. Negotiate with humans. There was a fragility in Arthur's eyes. He couldn't help but laugh sinisterly. Negotiate. Wei Wei Bai revealed a smile, her eyes filled with longing and affection. Treat it as a gift to me, Arthur. I can't wait 100 years. I just want to see the Book of Peace with your seal before I close my eyes. Promise me, okay? Wei Wei Bai knew that she couldn't hold on any longer. She had no choice but to use her final trump card. Give me a last request. With a favorable impression of 98 points, if she begged and cried a little, it would probably reach 100 points. Originally, he could have completed the mission and gotten away easily. But the green bars forced her to die with grievances. She could only act coquettishly before she died. She asked the system, as long as the Book of Peace was successful. The green bar value would be full. Hence, let's negotiate. His Royal Highness, with 98 favorability points, will definitely make him relent. Wei Wei Bai's eyes sparkled like stars. Arthur's face softened into sorrow. He seemed to soften. Then, Wei Wei Bai heard him speak as if he had a deep hatred for humans. In a world without you, there's no point in negotiating peace. It's better to just destroy it. It's coming, it's coming. The ultimate line of the Demon King of Chinibu. Wei Wei Bai held back a mouthful of blood in her chest. She wasn't poisoned to death. She was embarrassed to death by this line. Arthur lowered his head and pressed against her forehead. He said softly, "The peace that humans have now is all thanks to the mercy of the vampires. If I take back this mercy, humans will become slaves. They will be raised in captivity, wantonly abused, and casually slaughtered. They will have no dignity, no clothes, and are only fit to crawl on their knees." Wei Wei Bai's breath was stuck in her throat. His green bar value dropped again and again. Chapter 982. The system sighed in pity. "Host, we've known each other for a long time, I'll miss you when you die." Bai Weiwei exploded, "I'm not dead yet, are you in a hurry to find your next home? You slagstem, you haven't even divorced yet, and you're so eager to make me wear a green hat." The system said, "If you're so afraid that I'll run away, you'll come back to life." Weiwei Bai's head started to spin. Target and system. One was more unreliable than the other. She had a hard life. Arthur was still threatening her. "I'm already the leader of the blood breeds, I can decide the fate of all humans as I wish." Wei Wei Bai's fingers pinched his collar tightly. Hatred started to appear in her eyes. Arthur gently touched her eyes. "So get better quickly, I'll do whatever I want to the humans, you can do whatever you want to me, okay?" It was a sweet sentence. It was almost like a spoiled child. Wei Wei Bai's vision turned black. She discussed with the system, "How about a life guarantee?" The system's tone became worried. "The poison has entered the heart and lungs, the high magic cursed venom, the life guarantee won't last. I'm looking through the supermarket catalog for the antidote, you have to hold on." Wei Wei Bai, "I can't hold on any longer." Suddenly, Arthur grabbed a large towel and wrapped it around her. He wanted to take her directly to the infirmary, steal the rest of the holy water, and then kill his way to the rebel army headquarters. There was still time. After walking out of the door, Arthur stopped in his tracks. The dagger in Lo's hand was covered in blood. On the spacious living room floor, a magic circle drawn with blood appeared. Lo's face was terrifyingly pale. He looked up and said weakly, "Give her the embrace." Arthur's straight body bent. He gritted his teeth and said, "It's no use, the cursed venom will stop her from converting." Otherwise, he would have forcefully the embrace from the start. Lo sneered, "This magic circle is made with my blood is special, it has a purifying effect. When the holy water was invented, it was also analyzed using my blood." This was his secret. It was also the reason why his identity was so special. He was a purifier. It could purify a lot of evil venom. However, his blood had to be specially refined before it could become the antidote. Therefore, directly feeding Wei Wei by blood did not work. However, the embrace formation could be used to purify it. This was the fastest way to do so. You don't have a choice because there's no time. If the array doesn't have enough blood, I'll keep providing. Arthur could see that he was on the verge of death. He touched her cold skin and decided to trust Los one more time. He didn't trust Los's character. It was because he liked Wei Wei Bai. For the first time, Arthur felt that this man's love was not so annoying. At least he could save Wei Wei Bai. The array was activated, and Arthur began to bleed Wei Wei Bai. The blood was bright red and cold as it was absorbed by the formation. The purifying effect began to appear, and the originally blood-red spell formation began to emit a white light. Arthur scratched his neck and a large amount of blood gushed out. He lowered his head and stroked his lover's face, his expression affectionate and soft. "Wei Wei, wake up." Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes in a daze, but her eyes were not focused at all. She was pressed against his neck, and her lips and tongue were stained with his blood. Her body trembled as if she wanted to escape. However, the man who was hugging her was firm and did not allow her to refuse. He pressed her head, wrapped his arms around her waist, and intertwined his silver hair with her long hair. It was as if they were going to die together. In the hazy white light, The blood on Los's wrist had been providing the purifying power of the array. He looked at the two people in the middle of the array. A tall male body blocked his line of sight. Chapter 983. This was the 10th day of Wei Wei Bai's deep sleep, and also the beginning of the countdown. One more week. She was going to be struck to death by lightning. No, vampires were not afraid of lightning. So the system had already issued a very conservative and completely non-demonic suicide method. She would burn herself to death. It was that simple, if she could move. The system and Wei Wei Bai floated in the air, looking at the sleeping girl on the bed, and the clothes. No, the naked beast beside her. On the first day of her deep sleep, Arthur fed her blood, but it was useless. On the second day, he carried her into the blood pool, trying to use a large amount of blood to stimulate this body to wake up. But it failed. On the third day, he madly collected the water of life, but it was useless to vampires, so he also failed. On the fourth day, he started to hold a blood feast, which lasted for 3 days. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "Human nature is not what it used to be. Since ancient times, fickle people have mostly been men. I only slept for 4 days, and he's already having an affair." In the end, Arthur chose a beautiful young man. A young man. Bai Wei Wei and the system widened their eyes as they watched the young man with delicate skin and clean skin respectfully follow behind Arthur. Wei Wei Bai trembled, "So it's not an affair, it's coming out of the closet." Arthur walked to her side, then let the young man come over. The system was stunned. "Beast, beast, beast. Do you want to have a threesome?" "Threesome my ass. 2 of them were vampires, where did the threesome come from?" In the end, Arthur took out a knife, cut open the young man's wrist, and fed the blood to Wei Wei Bai. She drank it. But she still did not wake up. Arthur's eyes instantly collapsed. He grabbed Wei Wei Bai's wrist tightly. "Why won't you wake up? I've already found a human with the best smelling blood. In theory, you should wake up to look for food." Newborn vampires had a huge need for blood. With so much blood to lure her, she should not fall asleep. On the 7th day, Arthur sat beside Wei Wei Bai in a daze, like a fool. Sitting still. Sitting for a full 2 days. He didn't dare to touch her, let alone speak. Even his face was expressionless. However, his blood-red eyes were filled with weakness, fatigue, and pain. All kinds of negative and sorrowful emotions were present. Finally, he lowered his head and gasped for breath. "Do you blame me? Are you blaming me for turning you into a vampire without your consent? Is that why you chose to hibernate, because you don't want to see me?" They had tried everything. But she refused to wake up. There was another possibility for the blood breeds to fall into eternal slumber, and that was if the blood breeds willingly went into slumber. He didn't dare to imagine what he would do if she voluntarily went into hibernation. This was because there was no way to wake up a vampire who had willingly gone into hibernation. On the 9th day, Arthur finally moved. Then he came back with an unkempt man. Wei Wei Bai felt that the face was familiar, but she couldn't remember who it was. The system said, "Your younger brother." Wei Wei Bai suddenly realized that it was the little brother Xiao Bai that she had tricked into going to jail. Xiao Bai cried bitterly, "Sister, wake up. I promise to change and be a good person in the future. They want to throw me into the snake cave to feed the snakes. I will never gamble again. I regret it for life." As he cried, it became a memoir of Xiao Bai's remorse. He said that he shouldn't have taken her food when she was young and let her starve until her breasts couldn't grow. He said that he shouldn't have stolen her scholarship so that she couldn't even afford underwear and had to wear one for 2 years. He said that he wanted to sell her to a hoodlum, but the hoodlum got into trouble and failed. He said that none of it was a good thing. the. Chapter 985. On the 11th day, Arthur changed Wei Wei Bai's room to a new one. He gently washed her face and combed her hair. "I've called someone for a meeting. Come with me later. The doctor said that it might be good for your body to get some fresh air." Vampires were extremely strong. Unless they were hungry, their bodies were in good condition. They didn't need fresh air at all. But Arthur had to find something to do. Otherwise, he would go crazy. The meeting was held in a private room in the castle. It was sealed, luxurious, and had enough chairs. Arthur sat on the couch in the middle. She lay on the couch with her head resting on his lap. Arthur pulled a blanket over her. Then he began to unilaterally announce several treaties of peace between humans and vampires. The vampires looked at each other. They couldn't accept such a sudden request. But Arthur's bloodline suppression made them all kneel. After his ancestor's bloodline was completely activated, he was the one who had the final say in the vampire empire. And the vampires were a world where the strong preyed on the weak. Arthur said, "You can discuss more peace treaties to make up for the losses of both sides." The vampires were depressed, but there was nothing they could do. They could only leave and announce the unilateral announcement of the vampire's leader. At this moment, Wei Wei Bai heard the green bar change. 80%. Arthur's arm went through her knees and easily carried her out of the room. "I know you've been thinking about fighting for power for humans, so I've already planned to let you sign a truce agreement between humans and vampires after the embrace." This agreement was his gift to her. He was also afraid that she wouldn't be used to the embrace and would hate him, so he prepared in advance. He wanted to let her know that he could let humans live a good life. Only then would she be happy to accept the fact that she was the embrace. "I changed the truce agreement to a peace agreement. I originally thought that I would give you this agreement after 100 years. When he reached the garden, he stopped. The moonlight shone on the ground outside. He sat in the corridor, hugging her sleeping body, and suddenly fell into a daze. After a long silence, he said, "I've done so much. Would you be willing to wake up after seeing it?" Wei Wei Bai's soul stood alone behind him. She watched the moonlight with him. Suddenly, for some reason, she reached out her finger and gently ran it through his shoulder. Then, she hugged him from behind. The system was shocked. "What happened to you?" Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment before saying, "If I wake up now and hug him like this, will he not be so lonely? Will he be happy?" The system trembled and looked up at the machine that was suppressing Wei Wei Bai's feelings. Could it be that the shield was broken? Wei Wei Bai sighed helplessly. "Once I'm happy, the favorability will rise to 100 and the green bar will definitely be 100%. Then, I can go home and rest." The system that thought she had feelings for the male lead, waste its feelings, get out of here. The green bar value refused to increase, but when it was about to increase, it didn't stop. Arthur gave the peace agreement. Humans and vampires began to enter a tug of war over the peace agreement. Many of the agreements required a long time to explore, experiment, and amend. It wasn't something that could be done in 1 or 2 years. But for humans who were just prey, this was undoubtedly a huge improvement. Ross, who almost died during Wei Wei Bai's embrace ceremony. He brought a few guards and some draft of the peace agreement to visit Arthur. // Chapter 986. Arthur was applying lipstick for Wei Wei Bai. Her lips were already very beautiful. But today was a special day. These makeup were essential. Seeing him like this, Los couldn't help but say, although she's asleep, she could still wake up. After all, she's already immortal. Anything is possible. Unless a new successor of Weiwei's bloodline appeared in the reproduction array. Otherwise, she wouldn't have died. And Weiwei's reproduction array had been completely destroyed by Arthur. Because he couldn't tolerate the possibility of a bloodline successor of Weiwei Bai and then taking away Weiwei Bai's life. Arthur didn't have a good attitude towards Los. There's a supplementary contract on the table. You can take it back and study it. If there's no problem, sign it. Los glanced at Weiwei Bai worriedly before walking over to pick up the contract. The contract was very beneficial to humans. Los picked up the pen and signed it. The supplementary contract was a later matter. It was right to implement this contract first. The moment he signed, the relationship between humans and vampires would change greatly. And the green bar perfectly indicated that it was full. For a person to be able to push the relationship between humans and vampires to this extent, he had already made a great contribution. As for whether humans could really continue to be in perfect peace with vampires in the future, it wasn't Weiwei Bai's mission. After he finished signing, he heard Arthur say, "You can be the witness priest." Los looked puzzled. What priest? Then he paused because he saw Weiwei Bai wearing a white wedding dress. Arthur had also changed his clothes. He was wearing the groom's black suit. I was going to give her a human wedding. I was going to give it to her before her first embrace, but it was too late. Los pursed his lips and was silent for a moment before nodding. Okay. The wedding was unexpectedly simple. He held Weiwei Bai and stood in the church full of roses. Los meticulously carried out the human wedding process. It was very smooth. When he called the ring at the end, Arthur took out the rose thorn ring. She put it on for Weiwei Bai. Suddenly, the ring on her finger flashed red. Meanwhile, Weiwei Bai, who had been drifting outside, felt a sharp pain in her soul. She took a deep breath. The feeling of her soul being pulled was not good at all. Arthur's face was so pale that there was no trace of life. His eyes were tired and calm. It was as if he was completing a mission. The bride has been sleeping, and may sleep forever. He felt that he was about to fall into an eternal slumber. If a vampire lived until they lost all their desires, they would automatically fall into a deep sleep. But he was only 100 years old, very young. No, after losing her, everything about him had aged. Finally, under Roth's announcement, he lowered his head and gently kissed her. Arthur lowered his eyes and his eyelashes trembled. Suddenly, he met a pair of blood-red eyes. Her eyes were a little dazed as if she had just woken up, but more than that, there was a lively radiance. Arthur was in a daze for a long time. Suddenly, his brain felt like it was hit by something heavy. He suddenly woke up and rushed out with Weiwei Bai in his arms. Ross was about to announce the end of the ceremony. The two people involved had already disappeared. Father Ross had a face full of bitterness and hatred, holding a wedding for the person he had a crush on. Was this a new way to torture dogs? Weiwei Bai had just woken up when she was forced to drink a large cup of blood. That feeling, needless to say, was ecstasy. Arthur stared at her so hard that his eyes were burning with anger. He seemed to be at a loss. When she woke up, he could only hug her and let her sit on his knee, face to face with her blinking eyes. Every time she blinked, he became nervous. He was worried that if she closed her eyes, she would continue to sleep. Weiwei Bai held the cup of blood and was about to say something when Arthur had already leaned forward, grabbed the back of her head, and kissed her fiercely. This kiss was like a storm, breaking into her lips and invading wantonly. He didn't give her any space to escape, making her lose all the air, making her uncomfortable, making her struggle. Letting her know how much pain she was in. Weiwei Bai's body trembled and she couldn't help but cry out, "Arthur!" This broken cry made him stop his beastly actions. He left her lips and stared at her blankly. His expression slowly crumbled. His unyielding, expressionless face crumbled into a twisted expression of discomfort. Wei Wei Bai wanted to comfort him. But he suddenly lowered his head weakly and rested his face on her shoulder. He was like an abandoned stray dog. His silver fur rubbed against her cheek, and his voice was choked with sobs. "Don't leave me again," he repeated in a low voice, "don't leave me again." Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 100. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but reach out, wanting to hug him. Countdown to mission departure, please complete the mission of burning suicide within an hour. Her hand paused, and then she silently put it down again. For convenience next time, you can click on the button below to record this reading record. Comma. Chapter 988. Bai Weiwei nodded her head and watched him walk out quickly. Then she immediately said, "Quick, buy some oil or something and burn myself." This was a race against time. The system reminded her, vampires are easily flammable. Just light a candle and you will start burning. You don't need oil at all. Wei Wei Bai immediately rushed to the table and picked up the candlestick. She grabbed her hair and was about to light it. Hair was the most flammable. In the end, just as the flame touched her hair, a pale but strong finger clasped the back of her hand. The flame on the candlestick almost burned her hair. But Wei Wei Bai couldn't move. The prince behind her said coldly, "Wei Wei, what are you doing?" Wei Wei Bai stiffened her neck and forced herself to turn around. Sure enough, she saw Arthur's gloomy face and his eyes were full of a twisted storm. He said fiercely, "Are you planning to burn yourself?" Wei Wei Bai said, "Actually, I just think that this candlestick is very pretty, so I picked it up and admired it." This excuse was still so stupid and willful. But Arthur didn't explode. He only suppressed it for a long time before he slowly pried open her fingers and took away the candlestick. "This thing is dangerous for you. Don't touch it in the future." His voice was gentle, but his eyes were still terrifyingly dark. Then he asked the servants to come in and take away all the candlesticks. Most of the candlesticks were used by vampires to decorate their castles. It didn't matter if they lost the candlesticks because there were electric lights. Then he closed the door tightly and personally watched over her to feed her blood. His expression was terrifyingly cold. Although his movements were gentle, there was an irresistible compulsion. Wei Wei Bai felt that the extent of his evil had deepened. Arthur's tone was gentle, "I ordered a large coffin. If you are tired, you can sleep with me." Wei Wei Bai was a little reluctant when she heard about the coffin. "I can sleep on the bed. Sometimes you need to sleep longer. The coffin is stronger." Arthur looked up at her, his voice gentle but sinister. "I know that if I force you to change your identity, you won't be able to accept it. I know that." Wei Wei Bai struggled, trying to make him behave normally. "It's okay. I can accept it." Arthur looked at her coldly, and then he couldn't help but reveal a mocking smile. "Indeed, it was very difficult for you to accept this identity in the beginning, so you were a little depressed. That was why you did something so irrational like self-immolation. You accepted it after we slept together for a few years. The coffin had a special magic power. After forcing her to sleep for a few years, she would slowly be brainwashed into accepting her identity as a vampire. In the past, some humans couldn't accept the identity of a vampire and committed suicide out of depression. Therefore, Arthur was not surprised at all that Wei Wei Bai had committed suicide. After all, he knew very well how much she hated vampires. He had long been on guard against her, which was why he quickly turned back as soon as he walked out. Then, he saw with his own eyes that her expression was indifferent. Her fingers didn't even tremble as she planned to set herself on fire. Arthur's mood sank to the depths of hell. He took out a syringe. It was the medicine he had obtained from the rebel army. The good thing about the rebel army was that they had been dealing with vampires for a long time. That was why they had researched many drugs to deal with vampires. Anesthetics were even used one at a time. Otherwise, this group of humans wouldn't have been able to hold on for so long under the attack of vampires. Once the peace treaty was negotiated, he would also get a portion of the medicine from the rebel army. Wei Wei Bai saw the syringe in his hand and her expression changed. Chapter 990. This was the Empire's central array, which had always been suppressed under the castle. Unless the vampire race was in danger of being exterminated, there were 10 elder-level vampires who were willing to sacrifice their own lives to activate it. And a large amount of vampire bloodline power would be extracted. Only then would this array be activated. The array had its own activation method, and the prerequisite was that it was in danger of being exterminated. The vampire race was at its peak now, and the first condition was not met. And the 13 elders were scheming and selfish, and wanted to unite more than 10 elders and sacrifice their own lives to activate it. What a joke. Even if the race was exterminated, these elders would pack up and escape. In this impossible situation, the formation was activated. And that group of selfish vampires also inexplicably sacrificed themselves. Arthur was imprisoned in the ruins of the castle. The red blood array began to operate. And those who stood outside the array, except for more who did not appear. The remaining 10 elders were all there, wearing black hooded cloaks, each of their eyes flashing with a crazy red light. It was as if they had been poisoned. They used their own lives to activate the array. Even if Arthur had the ancestral bloodline, the strongest vampire, it was impossible for him to escape from this array. The system was silent for a moment, and said to Wei Wei Bai, "Your wish has opened the biggest reward in the wishing ball, the lives of hundreds of vampires and 10 elder-level vampires, a great array to exterminate the country, including the male lead to accompany you to the west." This was the vampire race's biggest asset. The thing that would only be activated when a race was exterminated was actually drawn by Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai had opened such a jackpot for herself. Her mood could only be described as, what a fuck. She just wanted to burn herself, not drag the entire vampire race down with her. But she did not have time to calm down. The array's attack began, and the red light spots, like thousands of stars, appeared densely, releasing a terrifying bloodline suppression power. Wei Wei Bai herself could not bear it, and her internal organs felt as if they were being squeezed, trembling in pain. The dazzling red light was like a firework or an exploding star, resplendent and surging as it began to descend above their heads. Arthur's face was cold. Amidst the thousands of red dots of light, his body stood straight and firm. There was no trace of fear in his cold eyes. The blood race member who had activated the spell formation outside sneered, "Arthur, as a leader, you are delusional enough to want the blood race to submit to humans. Even if we have to sacrifice our entire race, we will still kill you, the traitor who betrayed the blood race." How awe-inspiring. How selfless and heroic. Arthur sneered, "Did you guys eat the wrong medicine? Your styles don't match." Scram. He had been scheming against these old bastards for so long. He had already figured out his character. This group of immortals who were selfish to the core were hypocritical and experienced. Only hot-blooded youths would play such a sacrificial act. It was impossible for them to be so united. Something must have gone wrong, or it was being manipulated by something. Only then would the elders collectively activate the array to kill him. No matter what the reason was, the array had been activated. This was the result. The blood tribe cultivators outside the formation collapsed in droves. All of them had their blood and life sucked out to become nutrients for the formation. Wei Wei Bai's body relaxed. She discovered that Arthur had spread his wings, and the black bone wings enveloped her. All the suppressive power was isolated. The power of the attack caused his long hair to fly. The silver strands of hair in the red light gave off a sense of cleanliness that could steal one's soul. Chapter 991. He lowered his eyelashes, and a desperate light appeared in his eyes. Don't be afraid, you'll be fine. You'll be fine, what about him? Arthur suddenly reached out, the skin on his wrist cracked, and red blood splattered out. A huge blood blade appeared in his hand. Wei Wei Bai only felt her vision go black. He held her tightly in his arms, but there was a violent roar in her ears. The blood blade broke, the array roared. And the man who was holding her, trembling with blood all over, was transmitted to Wei Wei Bai's body. Her chest began to feel stuffy. It was still empty, but she was very tired. A terrifying reward was given. Wei Wei Bai felt that the malice of this world was practically on the screen. Wei Wei Bai struggled to open her eyes, and could barely see outside the black wings. A chaotic red light. Arthur's power collided with the array. It was like two planets colliding. There was a tragic feeling of mutual destruction. But she was a little flower protected by the planet. She could not feel the storm at all. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "This reward is not reliable. The one who burned himself in the end was Arthur, not me. If this continued, even if Arthur died, she would not die. The system, the reward is so big, you will definitely die." It had just finished this sentence. Arthur suddenly knelt on one knee. He protected Wei Wei Bai with one hand. His face was covered in blood. His eyes were fierce and wild. The power of the array was temporarily suppressed by him. The center was stabbed by his blood blade. The array could not operate. But he had used up all his strength. He could not move. The array would still operate. When his blood blade broke, all the life here would be swallowed by it. Arthur coughed, suppressing the pain. His expression remained calm. He carefully put Wei Wei Bai down, gently holding her face with both hands. The hostility in his eyes disappeared. "Do you see that boundary? Walk out of the red circle of light and find more." Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly. There was not a single piece of unharmed flesh on his body. There were only two colors on his handsome face, red blood and incomparably pale. However, his eyes were as deep as the starry sky, filled with tender love. This was the first time Wei Wei Bai realized that 100 favorable impression points could actually make a man sacrifice himself to such an extent. She rarely thought about these things. After all, she had already left after the mission of obtaining 100 favorable impression points. She thought that with a favorable impression of 100 points, he had fallen in love with her. But after she left, he would always be able to get over it. Love wasn't everything in life. There weren't many cases of people dying after falling out of love, even in the news. Arthur saw that she was in a daze and gave her a gentle push. "Hurry up and leave. I'll catch up with you soon." However, Wei Wei Bai knew that he could not move. The strength he used to push her was pitifully small. Both strong and weak appeared on this man's body at the same time, reflecting the red light, the brilliance flowing beautifully. Wei Wei Bai was not only unhappy, but also felt heavy. Although she could not understand feelings, this kind of heavy feeling made her feel unusually uncomfortable. She communicated with the system. "Your system, do you have the ability to make people forget about me?" System, "Yes." "Wei Wei Bai, why didn't you say so?" System, "You didn't ask." "Wei Wei Bai, can I use it on Arthur?" System, "To use this thing, you have to complete all the missions. The self-immolation mission in this world is extra. In theory, you've already completed the mission, so you can use this function on him. In the past, she had no chance to use it at all. Because when the mission was completed, it was also the time of her death. Unexpectedly, in this world, she had completed all the missions. She had not left yet. Wei Bai nodded, then patted her arms. After warming up, she stretched out her hands and passed through Arthur's arms. Then, she used her strength as a blood breed and dragged Arthur out of the red circle. Arthur's eyes narrowed, and he said in a hoarse voice, "You go out first. If you drag me, I might not be able to run in time." She would not be able to run far with him. Once the array was destroyed, the area of effect would be very large. Wei Bai ignored him. The effect of the array was not that great. After all, it was a reward from the wishing bowl. She had asked the system. Once she succeeded in self-immolation, the array would disappear automatically. She dragged Arthur out of the array. She sighed in relief. Then she said to him, "Forget me, Arthur. I'm not a good person. Goodbye." A trace of confusion appeared in Arthur's eyes. He did not know why she said that. Forget her. Even if he forgot himself, he could not forget her. Wei Bai smiled. Under the dark sky, her smile was warm and cute. She lowered her head and gently kissed him on the lips. Then she stood up and walked into the array. The blood blade in the center of the array suddenly broke. Arthur saw the red light spots all over the sky fall on Wei Bai's body. His mind started to go into a trance. All the memories of her were spinning and disappearing. Arthur used all his strength to raise his hand, wanting to grab her body that was disappearing into the red light and was starting to turn into ashes. But in his palm, he only grabbed an empty void. // Chapter 992. Wei Bai heard a familiar notification sound. Host completes the mission and gains 30 days of life. Difficulty of the plane gains an additional 20 days of life. Additional missions add 5 days of life. Deducting all kinds of things the host used in the plane. The main system despises you for being poor and gives you an extra discount, deducting 50 days of life. Remaining 805 days. Can accommodate external life, 1,200 days. Because this plane did not use substitute stickers. In addition, because she was poor, she was given a discount. Wei Bai clearly used a lot of the system's things. In the end, only 50 days of life was deducted. That's your sister. She was abused into a masochist. But after deducting the life, she actually gained 5 days of life. She was actually a little touched. She really was a masochist. Wei Bai's face was a little pale and her mood was low. This kind of tiredness after waking up seemed to be brought from the previous plane. Because she could not feel any emotions in the plane. So now she could not analyze where her tiredness came from. The system saw that her mood was not right and carefully comforted her. "What's wrong?" Wei Bai said lightly, "I'm not in a good mood, I feel very low." The system saw that its heartless host was in such a bad mood, and its mood was also low. It could not help but take out its collection of limited edition snacks. "I'll give you a 10-year collector's edition chocolate ball, your mood will be better. Eat these, if not too much, and your mood will return to normal soon." Wei Bai lowered her head, and her expression could not be seen clearly. "Do you have mangoes or something? I want to eat that." The system immediately rummaged and took out a bag a little embarrassedly, and finally found a small piece. "I've finished it, there's only a little left, next time I'll definitely leave some for you, definitely." Wei Bai's voice was even more uncomfortable. She covered her face and trembled, as if she was about to cry. "Is there anything else?" The system felt that it had committed a terrible crime. why couldn't it control its mouth and eat it all? There's still a little bit of potato chips. I've already eaten the instant noodles. Do you want me to buy you a blackberry cake? It's delicious. Wei bye. Oh. The system suddenly felt that there was something wrong with the atmosphere. It glanced at the host and found that the host was covering her face with one hand. Through the gaps between her fingers, a pair of murderous eyes could be seen. She didn't look sad at all. She moved her hand away and sneered, "Come, count it. Chocolate, dried mango, potato chips, instant noodles, and you even plan to buy me a blackberry cake. You've eaten 40 days of my life points, haven't you?" The system was shocked and immediately stuffed the bag of dried mango into its mouth in an attempt to destroy the evidence. "No, I didn't eat. I just ate a little bit, a little bit." Wei Bai sneered, "That's why you don't dare to make a list. Because half of the list is snacks, isn't it?" The system hugged its precious chocolate tightly. I'm under a lot of pressure. Let me be reckless once in a while. How long has it been since I dared to go out on the streets? Other hosts have already bought bags, luxury accessories, cars, and houses for their systems. They're all living a well-off life. The more it said, the sadder it felt. The system whimpered, "I don't have a car, a house, or clothes. All that's left is the discounted snacks." Wei Bai, damn, why did it sound so miserable? It felt like her system was living in the slums, yet she was still scolding it. Slash. Chapter 993. Wei Bai's heart softened. "When I have a lot of life points in the future, I'll buy you a house too." The system was delighted. "A house is worth about 1,000,000 life points." Wei Bai said. "A house is nothing. You can live well without a house." The system was speechless. Wei Bai immediately changed the topic. "Yi Yuxuan didn't tie me up anymore, did he?" The system said, "No, he tricked your father into going abroad to look for a doctor. He and your doctor are back." Wei Bai asked, "Did they find a doctor?" The system said, "They found a medical team. Your heart is not good, so they are looking for a suitable heart to transplant for you." Wei Bai opened her eyes and saw that she was still lying on the bed in her own room. She said, "Can my heart be transplanted?" It was not that she did not have a chance to do it before, but her body was too weak, so it was delayed. In the end, she did not find a suitable heart. The system was silent for a while. "It will fail. Your body is already dead. Your health depends on the system's rewards. In reality, all methods to extend life will fail." She could only continue to succeed. Obtain enough life points. Snatch enough luck before the main system found out about her existence. It successfully turned a large amount of life points into a wish to live. By then, she would be able to obtain a healthy body and have a smooth and peaceful life. This was the direction that the system had been working towards. It looked at the clueless Wei Bai and sighed. The host's innate conditions were not good enough. It was also worried sick. Wei Bai struggled to get up from the bed and vaguely heard voices outside the door. She landed silently, walked to the door, and half opened it. The first thing she saw was the back of an elegant sitting figure wearing a white shirt. His short black hair was not neatly combed, and there were some strands at the back of his head, as if he had just woken up. When Wei Bai woke up, she could feel the warmth beside her. Yi Yuxuan, this guy, would not be sleeping with her all the time, right? Do you have any objections? His voice was light and calm. Although his tone was not high, it made people feel like he was talking to a servant. Sure enough, Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu both put their hands on their knees and their momentum weakened by more than half. Bai Changyan reluctantly said, "My dear nephew, I feel that Wei Wei's body is too weak. Although you two are in love with each other, I also know about your family situation. It's too rushed to get married so soon. Yi Yuxuan turned her head and glanced at him. Oh. The word "oh" was so cold that it made old Father Bai tremble. Yi Yuxuan looked at him coldly for a moment. She seemed to remember that this guy was Wei Wei Bai's father. If it was her father, he had to be more polite. This was the way of the world. After analyzing so many feelings, he finally knew that if he wanted to please her, he could sometimes do things in a roundabout way. For example, he could curry favor with old Father Bai, who was an eyesore. Yi Yuxuan smiled at old Father Bai. His face was so handsome that it was off the charts, and he looked good when he smiled. But Bai Changyan only felt a chill. This guy wouldn't want to silence him, right? Her smile was scary. Qin Qiu also coughed twice. You know my patient. Her body is a little weak. You should take it easy. Don't think that if you throw those chains and handcuffs into the trash can, I won't be able to find them. Yi Yuxuan calmly explained, those are not fun, /. Chapter 994. Qin Qiu, if it's not a romantic interest, then what is it? Don't tell me you want to force it. Yi Yuxuan was silent. The scene was very awkward. Yi Yuxuan indifferently felt that he should warm up the scene. So he added, I failed. Forced, failed. It was better not to explain. These 4 words combined to create a scene that was worse than a beast. Bai Changyan clutched his chest and pointed at Yi Yuxuan with a trembling finger. My daughter failed to force you with a chain and handcuffs? Yi Yuxuan, how unbearable is your daughter in your eyes? When Wei Wei Bai heard her father say this, she almost threw herself forward. This was her biological father. Yi Yuxuan's eyelashes fluttered. He suddenly turned his head. He saw her standing at the door of the room. She was still wearing the light yellow pajamas that he put on for her. Her long hair was braided into a single braid that hung softly on the side of her chest. She seemed to have just woken up. Her hair was fluffy and scattered, but it added a bit of cuteness. This cuteness injected a trace of sweetness into his heart that was full of holes. A myriad of bitterness could not compare to this sweetness. The corners of Yi Yuxuan's mouth curved into a faint smile. The man's voice sounded like a sigh. You're awake. This sentence hid a deep and complex feeling. But it was covered by his calmness. Wei Wei Bai could not hear his emotions and just nodded. What are you guys talking about? Bai Changyan saw that his daughter had woken up, and his face lit up. He immediately replied, Yi Yuxuan, this rascal, plans to marry you at the end of the year. I think it's too fast. After all, your health is not good. Wei Wei Bai also felt that her health was so bad. When her life was not guaranteed, it was indeed too rushed to marry Yi Yuxuan immediately. She did not intend to stop his engagement. It was for his life value. Even if he did not marry her, she would be thick-skinned and force herself on him. But he had already laid his cards on the table with Yi Yuxuan. Indeed, she did not have deep feelings for him. Engagement and marriage were a heavy burden. Wei Wei Bai looked at Yi Yuxuan. Have you proposed? Where's the ring? Where's the house? Have you prepared the household registration booklet? And did I agree? The series of questions made Yi Yuxuan's expression turn heavy for a moment. He nodded. Other than your agreement, I can prepare everything. Wei Wei Bai rubbed her belly and waved her hand nonchalantly. We'll talk about it next time. Yi Yuxuan had already gotten up and quickly walked in front of her. He gently held her hand and led her to the dining table. Then he very smoothly entered the kitchen. The oven was warm, the soup in the microwave was fresh, and there was a nourishing stew in the pot. Some of the ingredients for the side dishes had already been cut. His expression was calm and his movements were nimble as he quickly stir-fried the meat. With a sizzling sound, the pot was put into the pot. 3 heads poked into the kitchen. Qin Qiuan Bai Chang Yen, Wei Wei Bai, this man with his sleeves rolled up and a pink apron casually wrapped around him, his movements were so clean that they seemed to be glowing. Unexpectedly, he was cooking. Yi Yuxuan was actually cooking. Qin Qiu was stunned and covered her face. I've never seen him enter the kitchen. It's terrible. What's wrong with this world? Who is Yi Yuxuan? He was the incomparably precious successor of the Yi family from his mother's womb. After his birth, he was a man who smoothly opened his way to the peak. Not to mention the kitchen, even if he went out, he would want to spread a carpet for him all the way, so that he would not dirty the soles of his shoes. Yi Yuxuan looked up and saw them. He said to Wei Wei Bai, "Come in collection below to record this reading record." Chapter 995. Wei Wei Bai moved her feet and walked in front of him. "Do you need me to help?" Before she could finish speaking, a piece of stir-fried lettuce was stuffed into her mouth. Wei Wei Bai chewed it. It was quite delicious. Yi Yuxuan nodded. "It tastes right." Wei Wei Bai, ? Yi Yuxuan stuffed her with some other food. Wei Wei Bai just tasted it. Yi Yuxuan, it's a bit salty. Wei Wei Bai, ? Did she say anything? What did she say? Yi Yuxuan still used his own way to let Wei Wei Bai taste the food for him. "Well, you think the taste of this soup is just right. You can't eat too much meat. You slept for too long, so I removed most of the oil for you." Wei Wei Bai chewed. There was no oil. Yi Yuxuan had already put the food on a plate. You can't eat things that are too greasy. Even if it was meat, it was still processed. Wei Wei Bai looked sluggish. After she came in, she only cared about eating and didn't say a word. Just like when she was outside, she touched her stomach and didn't say that she was hungry. Yi Yuxuan knew. Yi Yuxuan looked at her expression and said, "Looking at your expression, I know how you feel." Was he still human? He could know how people felt by looking at their expressions. Wei Wei Bai admitted that she couldn't reach this level. No wonder when she tried to seduce him before, he could tell whether she was lying or not. Qin Qiu saw Yi Yuxuan bring the food over and immediately said, "Look at my expression. Do you know what I'm thinking now?" Yi Yuxuan didn't look at him. "I don't know." Qin Qiu, then how do you know if Wei Wei is salty or light when you look at her? Yi Yuxuan, because I love her. The other 3 people present, the system looked at this and that and said to Wei Wei Bai, "You're blushing." Wei Wei Bai said, "Get lost." During the meal, Yi Yuxuan skillfully served Wei Wei Bai food and handed her water and napkins. Old Master Bai and Old Madam Qin watched as Yi Yuxuan served Wei Wei Bai. She was especially calm and elegant. Old Father Bai asked, "Is he like this at home too?" How many times had he done this? Qin Qiu, at home, he is always served by others. Yi Yuxuan had never done such a thing before. Who dared to ask him to do it? Wei Wei Bai was also terrified. Yi Yuxuan was so good at serving her. She couldn't help but ask, "You know how to cook?" Yi Yuxuan nodded, "I just learned it recently." "I learned it for you." Wei Wei Bai quickly changed the topic, "You don't have to serve me food, I'll eat it myself." Yi Yuxuan calmly served her food, "It's okay, I know how to make you feel comfortable." Wei Wei Bai couldn't eat, "You learned this too?" Yi Yuxuan, "Yes, I learned it for you." He especially watched a lot of surveillance videos of restaurants and social events. How considerate the male partner was to his female partner. He had already gotten rid of the impurities and started to learn. Bai Weiwei clutched her chest. Tong Qing, what's with this heart-pounding feeling? When she woke up last time, he was still in his dark state and wanted to imprison her. Why was this guy so warm when she woke up this time? The system, I'm also moved. Damn, this food looked so delicious. It also wanted to have a system to hold its hand and feed it when it was hungry. And Yi Yuxuan's mood fluctuated greatly. His life points kept increasing. Qin Qiu couldn't help but say, Xian, you've learned a lot for Weiwei recently. Did you learn anything for me? Yi Yuxuan calmly replied, yes, I learned to ignore you. Qin Qiu, after Weiwei Bai finished eating, Yi Yuxuan took a napkin and handed it to her mouth to wipe it. Weiwei Bai held his hand and looked at him coldly. Yi Yuxuan, you don't have to please me like this, just be yourself. Even she was worried about him. Yi Yuxuan glanced at the oil on her lips, and his eyes deepened. I just learned how to take care of my delicate girlfriend as a boyfriend, that's all. Weiwei Bai, where did you learn? Yi Yuxuan, I asked on some women's forums and bought some books for reference. He really did enough homework. Weiwei Bai, why did you learn this? We are two independent people. Those forums and books are not accurate. Just like now, my hand is not disabled, you don't need to personally give me a napkin to wipe it. Just do what you want to do, don't be affected by others. Yi Yuxuan was so warm that his face was paralyzed, it was really scary. Yi Yuxuan pondered for a moment and nodded, I will do what I want to do, I understand. Then he threw the napkin in his hand. Weiwei Bai thought he listened to her, but in the next second, she was stunned. Yi Yuxuan leaned over, kissed her lips, and licked them. Then he whispered, I don't think I can be independent, I want to live in your heart forever, and be one with you. In the end, he added. This is what I want to do the most, from the bottom of my heart, and not be affected by others. Chapter 996. Living in Your Heart. Weiwei Bai trembled. Yi Yuxuan could still say such mushy words so calmly. He was much more skilled than her. She admired him. The system reminded softly, so far, you have more than 1,000 days of life. Ever since Yi Yuxuan was enlightened, his mood had never dropped. It was really scary. Even if Weiwei Bai did nothing and just sat far away, he would feel emotional just by looking at her. He would slowly hand over his life to Weiwei Bai with both hands. Weiwei Bai was calm, not calm at all. She didn't need to do anything. She just sat there and her life points would increase crazily. In the past, it was very difficult for her to increase it for 10 or 20 days. Now, Yi Yuxuan was either knocked on the head or disliked that he had too much life points. He was simply giving her life points whenever he saw her. Weiwei Bai said, good gift, give more. Then she turned around and wiped her mouth with a tissue. She suddenly realized that something was wrong. She wasn't wiping her mouth, but Yi Yuxuan's kiss. She looked back and saw Yi Yuxuan looking at her calmly. But why did his eyes feel so gloomy? Weiwei Bai felt that if she married such a person, it would be like hugging an ice cube for the rest of her life. She was already used to messing around. She couldn't imagine the two of them living in the same house in the future. Weiwei Bai thought about it and suddenly said to Yi Yuxuan, about marriage, let's talk about it later. You know that my body isn't good. Yi Yuxuan leaned against the back of the chair and nodded lightly, it's okay. I will make you better. Indeed, it was all thanks to him that she was still alive and kicking. Of course, Weiwei Bai couldn't tell him this. She could only painstakingly persuade him, what I mean is that my body is not suitable for surgery right now. It's useless no matter how many doctors you get me. I plan to treat it conservatively without surgery. Also, I sleep at a fixed time. If this problem isn't cured, I don't intend to get married. In the beginning, she was engaged to him. There was the problem of the family business. After all, at that time, she was a little ambitious and couldn't wait to bring her family's company to the next level. Anyway, she had no expectations for love. Yi Yuxuan didn't know why, out of so many healthy people, he actually chose her. She was thick-skinned and used her identity as Yi Yuxuan's fiancée to do many successful businesses. If there was money to be made, what was face to him? After all, this kind of thing was common in the business circle. Later on, he was so angered by her scumbag sister who was now nowhere to be found that he had a heart attack and passed away. Furthermore, he had been through so many planes. Wei Bai thought it through. Only by surviving and living well could one be considered successful. So what if the business was successful? She had the idea of breaking off the engagement with Yi Yuxuan. Later on, Yi Yuxuan was synonymous with life points. She couldn't wait to treat him like a treasure. Unfortunately, this treasure didn't accept lies, and the good feelings came inexplicably. Wei Bai was a little shocked. So before many doubts were solved, she decided to postpone her marriage for a while. Yi Yuxuan seemed to be listening to her seriously. He put his hands together and lightly pressed against his lips. He suddenly muttered to himself in a voice that was almost inaudible to others, "Have you forgotten me, or do you really not love me?" Then, his indifferent eyes quietly fell on Wei Bai's head. There was nothing there. The system's expression changed. It curled into a ball and hid itself well. /T. Chapter 997. That sentence just now was because Yi Yuxuan started to doubt his feelings for Wei Bai in his dream. In the past, when Yi Yuxuan experienced in his dream, he could only see his own experience. So he always thought those heart-wrenching things. Maybe it was a past life that he and Bai Wei had experienced together, or a previous life. But in the previous world, Wei Bai did not go back because she completed the mission. In addition, when she left in the end, she was too strong and did not care about the consequences. She did not care about what Arthur thought. Arthur might not have thought so much. But Yi Yuxuan was different. Yi Yuxuan was rational and calm. Even if he was tortured by emotions, he would not become stupid. Wei Bai's sentence before she left that she was not a good person might have made Yi Yuxuan start to doubt. The system carefully looked at Yi Yuxuan's expression. Could it be that he knew something was wrong with Wei Bai's 3 days of sleep? What was more frightening was that he suspected that the Wei Bai in his dream had been lying to him. Thinking of the consequences, the system was afraid that on the day the truth was revealed, Yi Yuxuan would directly turn from love to hate and strangle Wei Bai to death. Its stupid host still had a face of ignorance and said to Demon King Yi, "Marriage needs to be careful. You are still young and have a lot of time. There are so many girls, you should take a look." She also saw that Yi Yuxuan gave her so much life points. It was rare for her to have a conscience. She would not let him hang on her tree anymore. But Yi Yuxuan's eyes turned cold. He seemed to be examining something, looking at Wei Bai from head to toe. Then he lowered his eyes, almost silently, and put his words on the tip of his finger. Looks like he forgot. The system knew what it meant when it said that it had forgotten. Yi Yuxuan must have connected the pattern of her 3 days of sleep with the pattern of his dreams. He knew that he wasn't dreaming about his past life, but the present. Moreover, he knew that every time Wei Bai tried to woo him, there were impurities in her feelings. Because he did not know about the emotional blocker, he suspected that every time Wei Bai woke up, she would forget the things in her dream. No one would go through such an intense process. He could still be like Bai Wei. acting as if nothing had happened. Wei Wei Bai felt that Yi Yuxuan's expressionless face had become even colder. Was it easy for her to see the slightest bit of emotion from a facial paralysis? Yi Yuxuan suddenly stood up, picked up the jacket on the back of the chair, and casually put it on. Then, without asking for her permission, he held her hand and led her away. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss. Weren't they talking about marriage? Where are you going? The empty dining table. There was only a table full of leftovers and 2 backdrops. Old Man Bai was silent for a while before he sighed. Look at the amount of food. It's only for my daughter. However much Wei Wei Bai ate, Yi Yuxuan made the same amount. Unexpectedly, he made it almost the same amount. And Yi Yuxuan didn't even make his own share. It was all prepared for Wei Wei Bai. Each share was a little bit. There would be leftovers, but not too much. It made them embarrassed to even pick up the food. They were even more embarrassed to say it. Qin Qiu also sighed. My family Xian has been good at math since he was a child. He has to calculate everything before he does. This is his bad habit. In-law, please forgive him. Old Man Bai also sighed. My daughter also has a problem. She is a little bit of a novelty person. She likes one thing today, and another thing tomorrow. If she really doesn't like your family Xian, don't blame her. Previously, she liked to stick to Yi Yuxuan so much. Today, it seemed that the novelty had worn off. Wei Wei Bai began to dislike Yi Yuxuan. Collection below to record this reading record. Chapter 998. It seemed like Yi Yuxuan was the one who was throwing herself at him. Hungry Qin Qiu, don't blame me. My Xian is like that. Whoever marries him will be a waste. Hungry old father Bai, actually, my family is the same. With my daughter's condition, it's really hard to find a good partner. The two of them were starving, and the ignored background suddenly sympathized with each other. Then they put their arms around each other's shoulders and went to eat and drink together. Eating dog food was not enough to fill one's stomach. It would only make one's heart feel stifled. Wei Wei Bai was led by Yi Yuxuan. When night fell, there were many people on the streets, all of whom were out looking for food and dating people. Yi Yuxuan did not say anything, just led her forward. The lights on the road fell on him, causing him to attract the stunned gazes of countless people. However, this most stunning man did not have the slightest change in expression. Wei Wei Bai secretly asked the system, how many days has it been? The system glanced at the life value, the full bar is 1200. This was a crazy way to increase the price. It made Wei Wei Bai experience the feeling of hitting the jackpot. To be able to get so much life valued so easily, by the time she died, she would at most have 50 life value. The difference between life value and life value was more than an abyss. It was more than one constellation. Wei Wei Bai felt that the two of them walking in the middle of the road were shining. She was not boasting, but she was also very beautiful. Standing next to Yi Yuxuan, they were a golden couple. She was even more eye-catching. The system expressed that it was going to vomit first. Wei Wei Bai coughed softly, but did not say anything. Yi Yuxuan had already turned around. Then he stopped, took off his coat, and put it on her. The warm coat had the unique smell of this man, strong and clear. He squeezed her fingers. Are you still cold? He asked her indifferently, but his eyes were surprisingly serious. Wei Wei Bai immediately shook her head, almost forgetting what she wanted to ask. Yi Yuxuan's lips twitched. Wei Wei Bai thought he was going to smile. However, this smile did not appear. He said, I just want to hold your hand and walk with you for a while. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. She couldn't understand his answer, even though she didn't mention her own question. However, seeing that her HP had skyrocketed, she would just let him do whatever he wanted. Wei Weibai felt that her skin was especially hard and durable. Yi Yuxuan didn't even care if she was lying to him. She held back her doubts and walked with him. The street lamps elongated their shadows. Yi Yuxuan suddenly stopped in her tracks when she saw someone selling roasted chestnuts. Wei Weibai glanced at the roasted chestnuts. He glanced at the side of her face and then walked over. Wei Weibai suddenly tugged at his sleeve. Yi Yuxuan looked at her fingers and the cuff of his sleeve. "You seem to like my sleeve a lot." In her dream, she had tugged at his sleeve many times. Wei Weibai blinked her eyes in confusion. "Who likes your sleeve?" "I like you because I like your HP," Yi Yuxuan didn't explain and turned to buy a bag of roasted chestnuts. Wei Weibai trembled. Yi Yuxuan actually went out to buy things, and he even bought roasted chestnuts. His style is magical. This man shouldn't sit high up in the sky and look down coldly at the people below, then say, "You stupid mortals." The last time when they went to watch a movie, she thought that was his limit. The system said, "He's also human. You think of him as a psychopath." // to make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click Save at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 999. Wei Weibai said, "Isn't this guy crazy enough? To be able to live like Yi Yuxuan, who was otherworldly and cold-hearted. Not crazy enough." The system said, "Aren't you treating him right now? For you, he turned from a neurotic to a normal man. A normal man would of course buy some earthly things for the girl he liked. Not to mention the roasted chestnuts." Even if Wei Weibai suddenly looked at the roasted sweet potato, Yi Yuxuan would still go and buy it. Wei Weibai said, "I think he's not normal enough. Did you swipe your card?" "Why would you swipe your card to buy a roasted chestnut?" As expected, the vendor silently took back the roasted chestnuts that he was about to hand out. "Sir, you can give me your current account or swipe the QR code." Yi Yuxuan glanced at the QR code. Although he knew what it was and had worked with it before, he did not like it. But he didn't like these, and he didn't use cash often, much less buy things. So, he silently turned on his phone and began to download a payment app. The vendor also looked at him silently. He was dressed well, but he could not even pay for a 20 yuan roasted chestnut. Poor people should not pretend to be rich. Wei Weibai originally wanted to help Yi Yuxuan out, but when she touched her pocket, it was Yi Yuxuan's pocket. There was something in the pocket. She took it out and saw that it was a list of books. She glanced at it and felt that not only was the world magical, but it was also collapsing. Yi Yuxuan methodically downloaded the app and calmly bound a bank card with a smaller amount. Then, he swiped the QR code. When the vendor saw that the money had been transferred, he passed the chestnut to him. It was an eye-opener that there were people who did not have payment apps in their phones these days. The vendor laughed and watched as Yi Yuxuan held Wei Weibai's hand and left. Then, he picked up his phone and saw that he had just received 2 million. Wei Weibai looked at the roasted chestnuts in his hand. He couldn't help but ask, "You like to eat this? Yi Yuxuan, aren't you the one who likes it? You kept looking over there." Wei Weibai just thought that it smelled good, but she didn't want to eat it. However, since he had already bought it, she had no choice but to eat it. They went to a stone bench by the roadside and sat down. Then they ate the chestnut side by side. Yi Yuxuan peeled and Wei Weibai ate. "Is this your first time out shopping?" Although his movements were neat and calm, his phone did not have the usual payment software that young people nowadays often used. Yi Yuxuan replied indifferently, "No, but this is the first time I've bought something so cheap." It was unexpectedly cheap. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the roasted chestnuts. She was not an otherworldly person. "This chestnut is actually a little expensive. It's not cheap at all. These few chestnuts cost $20. If there were cheaper ones, they could buy a few more." Yi Yuxuan nodded. "Yes, of course it's more expensive for you. It's more expensive than others." $20 was too little. He was worried that she would eat something so cheap. So he raised the price to buy it. His mood was much better. That was the amount he usually used. $20, he felt that this number was ridiculously low. Otherworldly Yi Yuxuan raised the price casually. He was very satisfied with his action of raising the price. After Wei Wei Bai finished eating the chestnuts, she suddenly looked at the book list with bad intentions. 100,000 Whys of Love, a low to high love cultivation lesson, 100 ways to pick up girls, when I met love. These book lists were taken out from Yi Yuxuan's pocket. Chapter 1000. Yi Yuxuan looked at her calmly and even fed her a chestnut. He did not feel ashamed at all. Wei Wei Bai read it herself, it was meaningless. This guy was even more thick-skinned than her. Yi Yuxuan explained, "I rarely come into contact with this kind of knowledge, that's why I bought some books." He said it as if it was a proper exam. Wei Wei Bai nibbled on the chestnut. For the sake of the chestnut, she said, "These are useless. Flirting requires talent, not reading books." Yi Yuxuan suddenly touched her lips with his finger. It was a piece of chestnut. Then he put his finger into his mouth as if nothing had happened. On his thin lips, his slender fingertips were shockingly white. Then he looked up, his eyes cold. "My talent may be average, so I can only learn from day one." Wei Wei Bai's words were stuck in her throat. What was there to learn from day one? This was a walking flirting machine. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "Did robot Yi Yuxuan really fall in love with me?" The system said, "This can't be considered love. He just has feelings for you, so he chased after you. He has some reservations about his feelings for you." The system was not lying. Yi Yuxuan still had a lot of feelings that were sealed up. Of course, those feelings did not include love. If it was just love, Yi Yuxuan had already given up everything. Wei Wei Bai still trusted Slagstem's words. She also had her reservations. Then she silently ate the remaining chestnuts. Yi Yuxuan saw that she had finished eating. He took out a tissue from his pocket and wiped her hands. The burly man, Vivian, felt a little embarrassed. She did not prepare anything and let Yi Yuxuan do it. Yi Yuxuan did not feel that it was inappropriate. His attitude towards Wei Wei Bai was very natural. It was as if he had known her for thousands of years. All the intense feelings had solidified into a fossil. After passing through the boundless wilderness and the endless river of time, he finally found her in the crowd. He suddenly felt. Just like this, he held her hand and quietly let her accompany him for a while. Was that enough to move him? Yi Yuxuan was at a loss. Was the emotion surging in his chest moved? She was clearly in so much pain, struggling to survive the dream. But when he woke up and saw her. But all that was left was feeling touched. Wei Wei Bai looked at him in confusion. "What's wrong?" Yi Yuxuan turned to look at her. After a long silence, she suddenly revealed a faint smile. Then, he held her hand again. "Walk with me." As long as she walked with him, the pain that had accumulated so many dreams would disappear. There would be less of it. He held Wei Wei Bai's hand again, and they walked quietly under the street lights. Perhaps it was because of the good atmosphere, she didn't find it unbearable to walk so awkwardly. Perhaps it was because Yi Yuxuan was too handsome. So looking at his face, even if he didn't speak, she felt that it was still bearable. Wei Wei Bai found a bunch of reasons. Suddenly, she said to the system, Tongzi, Yi Yuxuan is getting more and more pleasing to the eye. What if I accidentally want to fall in love? A man like Yi Yuxuan, who wouldn't be tempted? Of course, the premise was that he was different to everyone. And obviously, he was different to her. System, your current situation is not suitable to fall in love. Wait until you have a lot of life points and can guarantee that you can live a safe life for the rest of your life, then you can fall in love. A total of 1,205 days of HP. It was only a little more than 3 years. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head helplessly. That's true. I'm not suitable to fall in love now. Because the strategy of the plane was all about love. If she really fell in love with Yi Yuxuan, she would feel betrayed. Wei Wei Bai, let's enter the plane quickly. I suddenly want to earn more life points. The system nodded. Wei Wei Bai felt a familiar sense of fatigue. She tugged at Yi Yuxuan's sleeve. Chapter 1001. The sequel to The Vampire Prince's Little Blood Servant. Gorgeous roses bloomed in a crystal bottle. Under the bright crystal lamp, a lively vampire banquet was being held. A human girl and a vampire boy were going on a blind date. Arthur was drinking a substitute blood bag expressionlessly. Opposite him was the serious-looking Ross. This is a recent success of human research. There are many flavors of blood bags, and they are more delicious than human blood. For example, these strawberry-flavored ones are very popular with female vampires, but you can't find this kind of blood smell on humans. Ever since Lo signed the Treaty of Peace between humans and vampires with Arthur, he was very clear that if the vampires were to abide by it, then they could only let humans develop food that could replace themselves. Otherwise, vampires would still treat humans as food sooner or later. At that time, the contract would be broken, and humans would be the unlucky ones. So he had to let all vampires like the taste of substitute blood bags while Arthur's existence could deter the vampires. Only by making the blood bag more delicious than human blood. Let all vampires get used to the taste of blood bags and dislike human blood for being tasteless. They would be safe with humans. Arthur shook the red liquid in the glass, smelled it, and took a sip. Suddenly, he paused. Los looked at him calmly. This is the best blood bag. There's only a little, and it can't be mass-produced. This blood smell model came from the blood of a human girl. However, the taste of human blood. The blood bag could only show 30% or 40%. It was impossible to completely imitate it. Some of Wei Wei Bai's blood was with him, and he took it to study. Only then did he realize that Wei Wei Bai's blood was for vampires. It was something as terrible as drugs. It was too delicious, and it could even cause addiction. Arthur should be the most poisoned, but he didn't touch Wei Wei Bai in the later stages. Instead, he kept drinking the first generation's disgusting substitute food. As expected, he liked her very much. Arthur drank the liquid in the glass in one gulp, and then he threw the glass away. Disgusting. Los looked at him indifferently. This is already the best taste, no matter how picky you are, there's nothing else. There was only one Wei Wei Bai, and she died. No one could replace her. Arthur frowned. Bring me that human girl you're talking about. Lo said, she's dead. Her body has turned into ashes. I can't see her. Hearing this, Arthur suddenly felt a sharp pain in his hollow body. He frowned in confusion and suddenly asked, why did I sign a contract with you? He could remember every step he took to sign the contract. But he couldn't remember why he signed such an unfair contract between humans and vampires. It was such a troublesome matter with no benefits at all. Was he out of his mind to do that? It was easy for him to tear up the contract. But for some reason, when he thought of tearing up the contract, there seemed to be some kind of power that was stopping him. It was as if anyone would be unhappy if he tore up the contract. Who? Roth stood up expressionlessly and tidied up the documents on the table. Then he said, "Who can help you remember the things you've forgotten? I'm leaving." With that, Roth turned around and left. To him, when he found out that Wei Wei Bai had died in the conflict between the vampires, he was shocked. He hated himself for not having the ability to protect him. He hated Arthur even more for being so strong and actually letting her die. // For the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the button below to record this reading record. Chapter 1002. But when he saw Arthur's confused face, he felt that Arthur had suffered a huge blow because of Wei Wei Bai's death. Then, he chose to forget her and seemed even more pitiful. Loth could at least recall the days when he was with Wei Wei Bai. Arthur, on the other hand, lived like an empty shell. After Loth left, Arthur looked at the cup and felt a strong sense of fatigue again. He couldn't remember. He could clearly remember many things that he had done these days. But the strange thing was that he had been too active during this period of time. And after getting the position of leader, halfway through the baptism, he seemed to need to run out for something. He destroyed the ancient array formation of the baptism. The traces of destruction were obviously his. Because of what? Also, he found that he was married. The mark of the rose crown was still on his chest. He was actually married, but he couldn't remember when he got married. No, he remembered going to the graveyard. He also remembered that he was the one who knitted the flower crown. The thorns of the flower crown were very sharp, and the vampire's defense was useless. That was why his finger was bleeding from the flower crown. What was even stranger was that he couldn't remember who he gave the flower crown to after knitting it. Also, he should have embraced a human before. Because vampires who had the experience of embracing were different from vampires who didn't have the experience. The state of his body showed that he had embraced a human. The mark of that human was in his bloodline. That was why he could control everything about that human. But he couldn't remember this at all. Arthur looked at the room full of humans and vampires. In a daze, he seemed to see a slender figure appear in the crowd. Her long brown curly hair fluttered behind her as she walked past him with light footsteps. Arthur was shocked and immediately stood up, but there was no figure in front of him. He reached out and pinched the bridge of his nose. Did he sleep too little? Why was he hallucinating? Arthur got up and walked to the corridor. The flowers outside the corridor were very bright. Strange, his castle was now filled with pink roses. Roses on vines. He didn't like dreamy colors. But he remembered the scene when he ordered people to uproot those trees and plant pink roses. But why? Why would he suddenly have the idea of planting these flowers? Suddenly, he saw a young girl sitting in the corridor under the moonlight. She turned her back to him and looked up as if she was looking at the moon. Another hallucination. Arthur only felt that there was a huge emptiness in his body that was roaring. He grabbed her and held her. He suddenly stretched out his hand, but his bone-white fingers did not grab anything. Only a hand of moonlight and air. Arthur looked at his fingers in a daze. Strange, he wanted to grab hold of something. Arthur returned to his room. In the spacious room, the coffin was huge. It looked like a two-person coffin. Arthur lay in the coffin. Just like before, it was difficult for him to sleep. He touched the side of his body. There was nothing. He had been sleeping alone for 100 years. Why did he suddenly feel that he should hug someone to sleep? He was unable to sleep for the entire night and day. Arthur gave up on sleep and went out. The castle was newly built. The magic array in the center of the castle was activated and shattered the castle. Apart from those tenacious roses and roses, there was nothing else. // Chapter 1003. Everything was re-established. The activation of the array was terrifying. He even remembered the ugly faces of those old undying elders who sacrificed themselves to kill him. However, he had forgotten how he had managed to escape from the formation. It seemed that he activated his bloodline power and pulled out the huge blood blade, stopping the array from operating. But, how did he walk out of the array? The array inexplicably fell silent again and did not explode. He had forgotten all these things. Liz walked over and saw Arthur wandering around the castle like a ghost. She immediately went forward and bowed. "Your Highness, can't sleep." Arthur stopped in his tracks and did not answer. Liz said, "Why don't you sleep on the bed? It might help you sleep." A vampire suggested to another vampire to sleep on the bed. Arthur's brain was also fried. He actually listened to this suggestion and slept on the bed. He lay upright on the white bed. Suddenly, a few strands of long brown hair wrapped around his fingertips. Her hair color was very beautiful, and it gave off a warm feeling. Arthur stared at his fingertips in a daze and then looked down along the strands of hair. He saw a girl curled up in his arms. He only saw the twists of her hair and her white and round shoulders that were exposed outside of her pajamas. Her breath blew against his chest. It brought a warm feeling. Arthur was stunned for a long time, but he did not dare to move. He hated it when there was someone else beside him when he was sleeping. But he felt that she was supposed to be in his arms. He moved his lips as if he wanted to call out a name. A very familiar name, so familiar that he felt very uncomfortable. But he could not call it out. The long hair on his fingers suddenly disappeared. He paused and suddenly opened his eyes. Only then did he realize that he had actually fallen asleep on the bed and that it was just his dream. Arthur sat up and suddenly covered his face with one hand. His face was a little distorted. What did he forget? Arthur expressionlessly grabbed a coat and put it on his shoulders, then walked out of the door. Moore was still sleeping in the coffin. He was pulled out of the coffin in the middle of the day. He sat on the ground with sleepy eyes and said, "I say, little Arthur, you have so much energy. Why don't you go and mediate the conflict between humans and vampires? It's not even dark yet." The vampires were still in constant conflict with the humans. If it wasn't for Arthur, who knows how chaotic it would be. After all, a document wasn't enough to get the vampires to acknowledge the status of humans. It would take many years to change this view. As for the humans, they also knew that it was impossible for their status to change in a short period of time. Therefore, they mainly retreated and did not dare to rashly start a war. Arthur's cold eyes were covered with a layer of frost. "What did I forget?" Moore became spirited at once. "What are you talking about? Don't you remember your own memory? How could I forget anything?" To tell the truth, when he arrived at Arthur's ruined castle that day, he was scared silly. The 10th elder had turned into a dried corpse. Arthur was lying beside the ruins, covered in blood. As for Wei Bai, she was so dead that not even a corpse was found. All that was left was a handful of ashes that were blown away by the wind. He didn't even have the chance to collect her ashes. As for Arthur, he slept for 10 days. He was afraid that Arthur wouldn't wake up. In the end, he did wake up, but he forgot about way by. He thought about the first time Arthur fell in love with someone, and they were already married. But he ended up like this. He probably suffered a huge blow and didn't dare to face reality, resulting in amnesia. /T. Chapter 1004. Moore was selfish too. He hoped that Arthur could be a qualified leader. And way by was obviously his stumbling block. Forgetting is better, Moore thought. Arthur looked at him suspiciously. Really? I really didn't forget anything. Moore yawned. Really, you didn't? Don't you remember everything? How can you forget a woman? What woman? Moore's mind suddenly became clear. He looked up. As expected, he saw Arthur looking at him coldly. Woman. Although he said that he had forgotten something, he had never revealed that he had forgotten a woman. Moore hurriedly laughed. I suddenly remembered that I still have work to do. There have been a lot of conflicts between humans and bloodlings recently. With that, he hurriedly got up and was about to run. But a hand gripped his shoulder heavily. What woman? His tone was urgent. Moore's face was bitter. Arthur, since we are friends, let's forget what we have forgotten. It's better for you. Arthur lowered his eyes. There was a thick bloodthirst in his eyes. What did I forget? Moore said helplessly, it's no use asking me. I know your personality. If you don't verify it yourself, you won't believe me. When Arthur lost his memory, he was so vigilant that it scared people to death. So even though he knew that he had lost his memory and had forgotten about way by, he didn't say anything. However, he didn't say a single word. He only suspected and searched on his own. He was afraid that someone would lie to him. After all, people who had lost their memory were the easiest to lie to. Bloodlings were no exception. Arthur suddenly said, the rose array in the Holy Tomb can still be activated, right? Moore's body stiffened. He couldn't help but advise, this array hasn't been activated for 1,000 years. And if it is activated, your bloodline will be damaged. You have already been damaged once. If it is damaged again, your life will be in danger. The source of life for bloodlings was the power of their bloodline. Usually, as long as the bloodline was fine, eternal life wasn't a big problem. But once the bloodline was seriously damaged, it would fall into a deep sleep. If the sleep didn't come back, then it would be worse. It would fall into an eternal sleep. Arthur had undoubtedly gambled the power of his bloodline. For this woman, he gambled again and again. Arthur repeated, can it be started? Moore was silent for a moment before he said, would you believe me if I said no? There was no one behind him. Moore looked back, but there was no sign of him. Moore sighed begrudgingly. Come on, it's okay to lose your memory. Why do you have to rush to remember? Isn't it better to forget sometimes? The Rose Formation Array was a formation array used to find traces of one's married partner. Arthur came to the primogenitor's tomb. There was a beautiful rose pattern on the tombstone. He knelt down on one knee. His back was straight and lonely. The formation was very small, not as big as the Extermination Formation. Arthur placed his 5 fingers on the pattern and chanted a profound spell in a low voice. The tombstone emitted a faint light. The red roses beside the tombstone slowly turned white and wrinkled. One of the flowers faded and withered, as if something bright was disappearing. Arthur's expression turned even uglier. The blood vessels in his body were trembling in intense pain. But the doubts that had troubled him for a long time made him not give up on starting this formation array. Gradually, the light of the formation array began to grow. It finally turned into an oval formation array, emitting a cold white light under Arthur's feet. But he was the only one kneeling in the middle of the formation array. Chapter 1005. The rose mark on his chest was clearly burning. But there was no sign of another person in the array. He was clearly married, so the array's search should be effective. Regardless of whether it was in the past or now, the array would show traces of his partner. Unless the array had failed. But the pain in his bloodline told him that it had not failed. Or perhaps, when the partner he had forgotten disappeared, there was a power stronger than the array that erased her traces. That power was so strong that even the Holy Tomb array could not resist. That was why he could not find her. Arthur knelt on one knee for a long time, and the light of the array gradually weakened. In the end, it was so weak that it disappeared. He still could not see the person he wanted to see. He straightened his back and knelt on one knee in a daze, looking unusually lonely. Arthur looked at the white roses beside the tombstone. He reached out to touch them, and the flowers turned into powder and disappeared. Suddenly, an image rushed into his mind. Her kiss landed on his lips, with the taste of blood and soft sweetness. Then, without any reluctance, she turned and walked into the central array. Her body was like the rose. Under the power of the spirit design, it gradually disappeared and turned into ashes. And he tried his best to reach out to stop her, but in the end, he was still pulled into the huge dark vortex. This kind of despair tore him apart. He suddenly called out in a low voice, "Wei Wei." Who was Wei Wei? Arthur paused. He touched his lips helplessly. It did not go through his brain, but it was like a name that was branded into his body. Just like that, it was called out by him so simply. Arthur repeated, "Wei Wei." This name made him tremble. All kinds of emotions suddenly surged in his heart, causing him to have the urge to escape. Arthur suddenly got up and left the holy tomb as if he was fleeing. He felt that he had become too strange to be afraid of such a simple name. Arthur suddenly changed a lot. He liked to go to bed, to wake up in the day and sleep at night. He liked to make the room pink. He also liked those roses. It was crazy. And the strangest thing was that he often saw hallucinations. This illusion made him even more certain that Wei Wei existed. However, he couldn't see her face. He could only see her back, her long hair, and the occasional glimpse of her side profile. He chased after her every time. He chased until he was exhausted, but he didn't catch anything. Arthur's body was getting more and more tired. That terrifying feeling of heaviness was dragging him into the deepest darkness. He knew that he was not in the right state. This was a state of deep sleep. Moore felt that something was wrong with him, so he came to visit Arthur. Seeing Arthur's tired face, she finally couldn't help but say, "Why did you forget? Why is it still like this?" In fact, vampires rarely mated with others. This was because the vampires were a sentimental and fickle race. The only thing that was unique to them was that once they confirmed their partner and got married, it would never change for the rest of their lives. If one side died first, then the other side might follow suit. Even if he didn't die, he would fall into a deep sleep. This was the syndrome of losing a partner. He thought Arthur had forgotten and would not have the syndrome. But it seemed that it was worse after he forgot. His mind couldn't remember, but his body reacted truthfully. There were thick black shadows under Arthur's eyes. He looked at Moore gloomily. "I saw her." Moore asked, "Who?" "Wei Wei by. //." Chapter 1006. Arthur looked up and stared at him coldly. Moore smiled awkwardly. "I thought it would be better if you forgot, so I didn't dare to remind you." Arthur was indifferent. His voice was calm and suppressed. She's everywhere. When I'm sitting, she'll walk past me. When I'm sleeping, she'll nestle in my arms obediently. When I'm out, she'll sit on the chair and tell me to come back early. When I can't sleep and I'm wandering around the castle, she'll suddenly appear and tug at my sleeve, calling me Arthur softly. Isn't this a spirit? Of course, Moore didn't dare to say that. Arthur only needed someone to talk to. He gestured with his fingers. She's only this tall and weak. I can still smell that sweet scent on her that drives me crazy. And the temperature of her skin, the softness of her lips, and the feeling of her fingers resting weakly on my shoulders, I know everything. Moore coughed lightly and said teasingly, "Sounds good." Arthur immediately glared daggers at him. Moore didn't dare to say anything. Arthur then muttered to himself in a low voice, "But she won't let me see her face. I can't see her face even once." Seeing him like this, Moore finally couldn't help but remind him. She's quite cute. Her hair is brown and very long. Her eyes are especially round like a cat's. She's very energetic. Every time she angers you half to death, but it makes you stronger. Arthur was stunned for a moment. His mind was blank. He couldn't remember anything. But his brain told him truthfully that Moore was right. Moore was right. She was very cute. She was the cutest creature he had met in more than 100 years. Moore said, "Arthur, what's lost is lost. Don't force yourself anymore." He wasn't far from eternal sleep. Because in this state, he was terrifyingly tired. Arthur waved his hand. "You can go. I'll think about it myself." Moore felt that he had tried his best. Sometimes, persuasion was useless for bloodlings who had lost their partners. Arthur could still see her. During the meeting, he saw her sitting outside waiting for him. The dim yellow light shone on her body, making everything about her seem beautiful. Arthur suddenly couldn't bear to sleep. He was afraid that if he fell into an eternal sleep, he would never see her again. He was wearing a black uniform as he leaned against the door and looked at her sitting in a chair by the door. Her back was to him. Her long, curly brown hair was tied up high, and her ponytail fell on her back. Arthur suddenly whispered, "Wei Wei." She didn't answer. He couldn't help but reach out to touch her. But in his hands, he only touched air. She was gone. Arthur's gentle expression fell into silence, leaving behind only a deathly aura. The rest of the blood race nobles, who had just finished their meeting, cautiously called out, "Sir." Only then did Arthur realize that he had been standing at the door for a long time. All the vampires in the meeting room were blocked by him. Arthur didn't say anything. With a cold face, he nimbly walked away. When he drank the substitute blood packets, the taste was still very unbearable. However, the smell of human blood was even more unbearable. He complained uncomfortably, "It's too disgusting." A sweet voice sounded beside him, "Arthur, I taste very good. Do you want me to share some of my blood with you?" Arthur couldn't help but reveal a gentle smile, "You're not in good health, how can I bear to bite you?" After saying that, he paused for a moment before cautiously looking to the side. Chapter 1007. Sure enough, he saw her sitting sideways in the rose bushes not far from him. There were roses between them. Her side profile was dyed with a few rays of light through the pink roses. It was exceptionally beautiful. Arthur's eyes welled up. He carefully called out, "Wei Wei." She smiled. "Yes." Arthur suddenly reached out and tore apart the flowers at lightning speed, wanting to catch her. But his fingers were empty. His hand was full of petals, but she was gone. Arthur was suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. He lay down among the roses. He stared blankly at the sky. Then he curled up into a ball and trembled. Why couldn't he catch her? Before going to sleep, he lay quietly on the bed. In a daze, she was lying on his chest again. He hugged her, not daring to open his eyes. He hugged her without moving and didn't sleep. The night passed. When he woke up, she had also disappeared. His body seemed to have been hollowed out by something. He was like a shriveled scarecrow that would be blown away by the wind at any time. He had clearly forgotten. She was clearly not here. But her shadow was everywhere in his life. He was living in an illusion, but he actually felt that it was very warm and beautiful. He was really crazy. Arthur was bored and held another peace meeting between the vampires and humans. Those vampires who betrayed him were almost all dead. The meeting went smoothly. At the end, the meeting room suddenly shook violently. Arthur's eyes became sharp. He slowly got up from his seat. The windows all shattered. Human weapons and huge cannons bombarded in. Arthur raised his hand. Thousands of blood blades spread out in a circle. All the attacks were eliminated. Get lost first, Arthur said coldly to the humans in the meeting behind him. Los suddenly pulled out his sword. He frowned. Be careful. There's a drug in the air that has no effect on humans. It's used against vampires. It should have been stolen from our laboratory by a human traitor. Arthur snorted. You guys sure know how to control your subordinates. You left me a mess. Los couldn't refute. Arthur's side was very restrained. After all, even the 10th Elder was killed by him. None of the vampires dared to go against him. Their legs turned to jelly when they saw Arthur. On the other hand, there were still some humans who wanted to continue fighting against the vampires. That was why he betrayed them and attacked the vampires. Roth said, humans are weak, but they're no less cunning than you. This potion is very powerful. Be careful. Arthur couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with these humans. He suddenly appeared outside the window and saw the traitors outside. The human weapons were arranged in a large row. The castle where the meeting was being held was being bombed. Arthur knew that humans were weak, but their technology was developing well. If there was a very powerful technology, the vampires would also notice it and collect it. However, most of them were completely useless weapons. A powerful offensive circular array appeared on Arthur's palm and blasted it down. The human race suffered heavy casualties. He floated in the air and looked down coldly at the humans below. It was like a high and mighty god looking at ants. Idiot, wouldn't it be better to obediently accept his offer of peace and properly maintain the fragile peace between the vampires and humans? Why did he break the contract? She'll be angry. Her voice suddenly sounded beside Arthur's ear. Wait until the day humans and vampires can coexist. Only then can I give my all to love you. Arthur suddenly turned around, but he didn't see anything. Then he heard his own voice. If I let humans and vampires coexist peacefully, will you love me? You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 1008. A huge wave rolled in Arthur's heart. He suddenly remembered. He was willing to sign the peace contract because he wanted her love. Then no matter how troublesome, boring, and meaningless it was. Because he could make her love him, he would gladly do it. Arthur suddenly saw a door appear out of thin air. It was an illusion. He knew that this was the illusion of the human medicine beginning to take effect. He could clear all the illusions with one slash, but he suddenly couldn't bear to do so because he knew what was behind the door. It was the memory he had lost, the most familiar desire hidden in his heart. The drug's hallucinations had stimulated his hidden memories. Arthur slowly put away his blade and walked over step by step. He placed his palm on the door. He seemed to hear someone sigh. Then he pushed the door open. Those surging memories instantly crushed him. He saw her appear at the blood feast for the first time, like a pitiful little rabbit, but she tasted exceptionally delicious. He saw himself abandon the meeting and go to catch her. She wanted to run away. He saw himself having a possessive desire for the first time, having desire for the first time, seeing a human smile for the first time, and being very happy. He even did many stupid things for her. He saw himself taking her to fly above Sunset City to see the scenery of the city. He took her to the vampire banquet just to ask her to dance. He couldn't see her face, but he saw himself leading her to the cemetery. He put a rose crown on her, and for the first time to a human, said the oath of eternal union. He saw himself at the baptism ceremony, sensing that she was in danger. He disregarded everything to break the baptism array, his bloodline was severely damaged, and rushed to save her. Then, he carefully embraced her in the embrace formation. Finally, he saw her face. She lowered her head, her long hair hanging down, her fair face was stained with blood, her amber eyes were really cute, but her gaze was calm and unwavering. "Forget about me, Arthur." After she finished speaking, she got up and mercilessly turned around to walk into the array that represented destruction. Arthur desperately reached out and hugged her fiercely. "I can't forget, how can I forget you, Wei, bye." He bit his lip until it bled, biting out hatred. How could she let him forget her so easily? How could she be so cruel? Did she really love him? How could one easily say such words when they loved someone? The bitter grief that had been trapped in his chest finally poured out. "How could you do this to me? How much do you hate me? Why would you use this method to leave me?" Arthur's voice was hoarse as he interrogated him one by one. He was as helpless as a child, not knowing what he had done wrong. He could only helplessly pray for an answer. However, the body in his hand became fainter and fainter. Arthur hugged her tightly. Her body was like quicksand. They disappeared bit by bit. In the end, Arthur stood there in a daze, his hands full of emptiness. It was as if she had walked into the array and turned into ashes, and all he could do was watch. Human potions could only confuse him for a short while. The sharp arrow pierced into his chest. This was an arrow with holy water. The pain made Arthur open his eyes, and the hallucinations were gone. Arthur saw that the humans who were still alive were still attacking him relentlessly. He raised his hand expressionlessly. The huge blood blade swept across, instantly flattening everything. Then he pulled out the arrow in his chest, drawing out blood. But he didn't feel any pain at all. Arthur looked at the corpses and said calmly, "You broke your promise, Wei." She said that she would accompany him and love him. Then he would let the humans live in peace with the vampires. But she broke her promise. Arthur suddenly had the thought of destroying the human race. But when he thought about how peace was her wish, he couldn't bear to destroy it. He suddenly smiled. "You really are my demon." Arthur turned and left. Then he entered the cemetery, made a coffin beside the ancestor, and lay down in the coffin. Then he slowly closed his eyes. It was good that he fell asleep. He would forget her. As she wished, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. His time was eternal. He could sleep until he forgot about her. Yi Yuxuan carried Wei by and walked forward step by step. The road was brightly lit, but it couldn't be reflected in his dark eyes. He thought of that vampire. He slept for many, many years until his body finally rotted and died. But he still couldn't forget her. Yi Yuxuan couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. How could he forget? His soul had been branded with his love for her so many times. Even if this world was destroyed, even if he died many times, his soul was engraved with her. When he returned home, it was empty. He put her on the bed and covered her with a blanket. The moonlight shone in. Yi Yuxuan lowered his head and kissed her lips. What dream is it this time, my little princess? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.